behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream.
Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.
For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Assuredly, I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here once again. It is episode 67 of the Bible Lens podcast. And I have a very special episode here today because joining me for this episode are two people who you guys have probably seen in prior episodes before. I think this is the third appearance for both of you guys on the show. Is that correct?
At least for me, it is. I know that.
Yep, for sure. Me too.
And we're joining here back today with two people who I wanted to talk about, this topic for a while. I know that they've been very interested on this issue. It's because, as you guys know, if you guys seen the previous episodes, we've had conversations with both Spencer for Bounding in the Comics, as well as a good buddy Shagsworth as well. And I think it's safe to say, I don't want to mischaracterize you guys here, but it's safe to say that you guys definitely had a relationship with religion in your past, and then you kind of shifted towards, kind of an agnostic view of religion. But you're both were open to at least hearing biblical prophecy here, because I think this is what interested both of you guys, because we've talked about this off air on a couple of occasions here, and some of you guys didn't know a lot of the information that I talked about, and it kind of blew your mind, and you wanted to learn more. So I figured what better way of doing that thing to get you guys both here and actually talk about biblical prophecy here live on the show. So first off, let's introduce our good buddy Spencer. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, my man. I'm always happy to hang out with you. And yeah, I think at least for me, that characterization was correct. And for your viewers, you guys have probably seen me in the chat for almost every episode. And that's because, yes, I am probably like the secular representation here. And even still with that, Jacob always has like really interesting things to say. The prophecy stuff gets really, really bonkers. Like once you start thinking about it. And also like, we've said this on the show before, but you also, just aside from the prophecy stuff, the way you talk about religion and Christianity and all that stuff is way more like informative and actually like I'm teaching you rather than like you're a bad person, I'm the best, check me out, right?
Unsaved, so, like, hellbound heretic, like that type of stuff. Yeah,
exactly. So I love the show. I'm happy to be here, and I'm super excited for whatever you've got on deck for us tonight.
And then also joining us here, at least in spirit, not on camera, but our good buddy Shagsworth. How you doing tonight?
I'm good. Sorry, everyone. I'm having technical difficulties with my camera. No one wants to see my ugly mug anyway. My beard's not combed. So I'm here. Jacob, thank you again for having me on. This stuff has interested me for sure, my entire life, really. But I've gone through phases where I'm on board, I'm not on board, I'm on board, I'm not on board. But as Spencer said, it's you approach things in a a very rational way, whereas I feel like other people just like shame you into like, why don't you believe this? What is wrong with you? So it's really
look. I'll admit I have my moments as well too. So quick little sidebar here. I was on the show. Matter of fact, it was right after I did the Friday show with Nerdigans. I was going to go on what's his name, Ironside show, and then a YouTube, I guess you can call him a someone in our sphere was doing an episode, and he was basically arguing against, the Jews in Israel being the real Jews, but he was open to have people on there. So I actually sat there and like talked to him for about a good like 30-40 minutes before I just reached a point where I got kind of frustrated. And it was really just a clicking point with me where I'm trying to explain things to him and I know he doesn't get it. It was kind of like that flashpoint of like, this guy just doesn't understand biblical prophecy. Just so happens to be on topic here tonight.
And doesn't want to like open up to it. Like he wants
to
of his way and go with it.
And the thing is, it's like, I don't want to go all in on him because like the content that he does, he's very, very good on the gospel. So when he's talking about the gospel of salvation and what the gospel of Jesus Christ actually is, he's actually very, very good. And I applaud him for that. But when it comes to like the prophecy aspect of the Bible, he's clearly very, very novice when it comes to that. And there's a lot of things he just generally doesn't understand. I wouldn't taking it from the perspective of, he just doesn't get it, or he's just not, like, he typically just doesn't understand things. He's coming to an interpretation that just simply is just not correct, right? And when you get to that point, it does kind of get you, like, I will say this before here too, is like, you guys, I think because you guys come from like a religious like standpoint where you're not like completely hostile towards like all things religions, it's a lot easier to talk to you guys about issues like this because you're more receptive to biblical truth, where you have like those more militant atheists who are just kind of like, they're just shut their ears to like absolutely everything, and then at that point it's just like you're talking to a brick wall. And
those are the Reddit atheists. Like they don't have any. They're sort of like the people we're talking, like Shags and I are talking about, the ones who just shame you into liking stuff. They don't really, or shame you into religion. They don't care about it so much as they care about being superior to you, right? Because that's how it always is. Like, oh, you think that, do you? Check this out. And it's like, no, nobody cares. We all acknowledge that's a thing that is in consideration, but go away. Again, it's the friend who has to come in and tell you wrestling's fake. Don't you know that? It's like, we know. Go. Nobody
exactly right.
Yeah. Go away.
Wait, but
I'm sorry to do this to you, Shags. I'm sorry.
Okay, so there was this one wrestler called Bruno Sammartino, right?
Are you telling me Razor Ramon wasn't actually Latin?
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, so like I definitely understand like when people get like frustrated, because you do kind of get to a point where it's like it sounds simple to you and you just don't understand why other people can't get it. But there's many verses in the Bible that explains that there is a spiritual blindness that is happening on the world and for major parts of the world for a very specific reason. And when you like interpret things and you read things, and it's like, how is it that, it's so clear to me? It's almost like I said, the Bible's hitting me in the head with like the point over and over again, but somebody else just can't click the same way. And you'll find out here, even in this episode, that there's reasons for that. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of our guys who are waiting for us here in the chat right now. Vanya's joining us here early on the show. Leslie Tarkin is here with us. I took liberties with some of the animal clips on here. Just a little bit. Awesome One's joining us here as well. I'm not liking the fact that a lot of you guys are already making like animal references to biblical prophecy. Like I haven't even gotten there yet. Like, it's like we'll get to the bears and the lions and the leopards. Exactly. Brandon Casual Gamer is also here as well. Of course, Spencer's #1 fan, Leslie Tarkin, is here with us.
My girl.
Oh yeah, and by the way, I think Vanya liked the clip. I sent him one of our intro clips with Vanya to it where he's Thor, and I think it came out better than Pete's Thor. So did a little thing for him there. So let's go ahead and start off with this. When you're talking about biblical prophecy, there's no way I can cram in all biblical prophecy on one show. I just can't. Like, even if I dedicated like the next 50 episodes to biblical prophecy, I still wouldn't have enough time to cover everything that the Bible talks about, right? So I figured, okay, what's the best way to tackle this for the time frame that we have? And I'm hoping to get to all these points here on this episode. Maybe we'll come back later in the future if we do run out of time. But I figured, what's the best way to explain biblical prophecy to two people who haven't quite accepted the gospel of Christ yet? And Shagsworth, was actually a conversation that we were having here before, because you're essentially making the argument that biblical prophecy is something that you find really, really intriguing, because I think for a lot of people, and it is kind of true, like, when we talk about the words that are written, like in the Bible, the words of Jesus, the words of the apostle, from a non-believer's perspective, it could just be like, okay, these are just the words of men. It's like, how do we really know what they're saying is true? How do we really know like what they're saying is credible? And from a believer standpoint, there's a much different sell to, accepting how the word of God works, how the Holy Spirit works, versus someone who just doesn't believe or just doesn't understand how this whole thing works out. So in all honesty, if the Bible was just nothing but the words of man, the whole thing could fall apart very, very easily, right? If it was just, guys saying that, hey, don't sleep on your wife, don't, cheat, don't steal, don't murder, stuff like that. It's like, well, anyone can write that. I mean, there's no divine, aspect to it in the eyes of a non-believer. So for this episode, what I wanted to do is that I took out 5 prophecies in the Bible that are prophecies that literally no man could have come up with, and no one could have come up with these prophecies. So these are prophecies that had to come from God. So what we're going to do is that we're going to start with some Old Testament verses and kind of relay how the prophecies of the Old Testament set the stage for what was to come even during that time period, and how things are playing out right now. Because if you also recall, on Friday night, Israel happened to attack Iran. Now, this is a response to an attack that Iran had on Israel a couple of weeks ago. So this was kind of a counter response. And as you know, what the things in the Middle East are heating up right now. And as I mentioned on the guy's show on Friday, it's like there is a growing resentment and anger and hatred that's building in this world right now towards the nation of Israel and towards the Jewish people. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Like, we're seeing this grow right now. We're seeing the thousands of people in the streets for the pro-Palestine support. And it's not just like one subsect. It'll be one thing. It'll be like, oh, it's just, those left-wing progressive wackos who are all doing it. We're seeing people on the right who are doing it as well. We're seeing self-professed Christians who hate the Jews and hate Israel. We're seeing non-secular people. We're seeing secular people. We're seeing Muslims. So this is not just one group of people. This is the entire world that we're seeing here. And that in and of itself is a prophecy of a time period that God said will happen during a time in the future. And when we start putting this whole thing together, you're going to start seeing that people like, okay, well, what's your evidence that God is real? Because, I can't see him. He doesn't open up the sky and say that, hey, I'm real and worship me. What's the evidence? It's like you're seeing the evidence play out right now, because what we're seeing in the world is something that was prophesied over 2,500 years ago. And that's what we're going to lay out here for the show. And then as I go through some of these prophecies, obviously I will take it to you guys for any questions or any concerns that you guys have here. So let's go ahead and start this one off here tonight with the book of Genesis. As you guys know, Genesis is the very first book in the Bible, the very first book written by Moses. So okay. What would
I already have my first question, and it's because you started with Genesis, and it's a really, really simple one. It's not like a gotcha or anything, but because obviously, like with Jesus's death, and then like the New Testament, there's that whole thing where it's like you don't have to necessarily worry about all of the stuff from the Old Testament, and I'm simplifying that really hard. Don't worry, guys. Mm-hmm. I know. How do the prophecies still play 1-to-1 in light of like Jesus's sacrifice, or is that like a separate thing that doesn't really have anything to do with Jesus's death or anything like that?
Well, like I said, a large portion of the biblical prophecy in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, was leading up to the death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's kind of what we're going to start here sense. Now.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we're going to see how, as a big part of, let's say, for instance, why the Jewish people still reject Jesus Christ as their Messiah. A big part of that is because there was a number of prophecies that even though Jesus did fulfill, he did not fulfill being the Messiah. So they believe that because he didn't fulfill these prophecies, that he couldn't have been the Messiah. However, what they don't understand is that their unbelief led to them, those prophecies not being fulfilled at his first coming, but will be fulfilled at his second coming. And even when you go back to the Old Testament in verses like, Zechariah. It talks about the return of Jesus Christ then, right? This is before his death, burial, and resurrection. So it gets pretty in depth here. But what I'm going to start here is we're going to go to Genesis 3. So I'm going to pop this one up on the screen here for you guys here. And for the record, I like reading the New King James Bible. Now, I know a lot of King James only people are going to be like, why aren't you reading the King James? Well, for the specific reason that I'm talking to you guys, if I start talking in like old English timey language, it's going to be hard enough to understand what I'm talking about here when I have to like say words like thee, thou, shout, and all this stuff, and it goes completely over your head. So I'm trying to simplify it the best way that I can here, which is why I'm doing this. But let's rewind here and let's go back. So this is dating back to literally the moment of the fall. And what is the fall that we speak of? You guys probably know this story. It is the fall where Adam and Eve in the garden sinned against God. And the reason why they sinned against God, God told them, do not eat from the tree of knowledge or else you should surely die, which was literally the first instance of sin, disobeying a direct commandment from God, which leads to death. And the wages of sin is death. The penalty of sin is death. That's a point that we see in the Bible, both in the Old and New Testament, over and over again. But Satan, who came in the form of the serpent, deceived Eve, the woman, into eating the apple by telling her that, well, surely you shall not die if you eat the apple. Basically saying that, well, did God really say that you were going to die if you disobeyed him? So she went and ate the apple first, which led to her falling. And then Adam ate after her. Now, this is always a common question here. It's like, well, wait a second. If Eve ate it first, why is it called the sin of Adam? Why is Adam essentially given the blame here for eating, even though they both ate it? Well, unlike Eve, Adam was the one who was given the command to not eat from the apple. So it was Adam's action that directly disobeyed God, as Eve was only deceived by the serpent by telling her that, she'll eat it and you will not die. Adam was directly told by God, and he was the one who fell. And based on his sin, we basically get original sin. This is where we essentially fight with a sin nature in our flesh versus the spirit. We'll explain a lot of that in more detail here in a second. But what we see here in Genesis 3 is that this is what is largely regarded as the very first biblical prophecy that was ever given in any other books in the Bible. This is the first here, and it comes in Genesis 14 and 15. Now, this is what it says here. This is God speaking. And it says that, so the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this. Now, obviously, he's talking about him deceiving Adam and Eve. Because you have done this, you are more cursed than all the cattle, and more than every beast on the field. And on your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all of the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So this is the very first prophecy of the Bible, and this is prophesying a lot of things that are going to happen thousands of years in the future. So let's go ahead and give a quick reference here. The events that are happening here are taking place from the very beginning. So we're talking about the beginning of creation. So we're talking about a detailed story here that takes place further back than the actual date of the book. But the date of the book of when the book of Genesis was actually written was between 1500 to 1400 BC. And it's very important to have these dates here because you're going to see how these dates correlate to future prophecy. Because people will say that, okay, well, how can, let's say, for example, let's say there's a prophecy in the Bible. Somebody says, well, how do we know that somebody didn't self-fulfill that prophecy, right? Like, I can say that, tomorrow so-and-so is going to get in a car accident, and then tomorrow I just ram into him, like, in a car. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, I didn't have, like, any kind of, like, spiritual, like, knowledge or anything. It's like, I literally said that someone's going to get in a car accident, and I ran him over with a car, fulfilling my own prophecy, right? Any scrub, any person can do that. It disproves their own prophecy. However, because of the nature of these prophecies and because of the time period of where it was announced to when it was fulfilled, it literally could not have been done by man giving this time frame. So the first prophecy that you're seeing here is a prophecy of what is going to happen to, obviously, Satan. God places a curse on Satan, saying that you are more cursed than all of the cattle, than every beast on the field. You shall eat dust, in all your belly you should go. This is literally saying Satan's fate thousands upon thousands of years before his fate is actually realized here. So when you go into the book of Revelation, you hear that there's a prophecy that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years by Jesus after the tribulation time period. Then he will be loosened after 1,000 years, and then Satan will rally the entire world against God one last time, all the unbelievers, and they will be consumed by fire. And at that moment, that is when Satan will be tossed into the lake of fire forever and ever, for all eternity, for all the deception of the world that he has caused. So quite literally, God is prophesying the downfall of Satan here from the very beginning in Genesis 3 with just Adam and Eve. But more importantly, he also says here in verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. So what's the question here? Who is your seed and who is her seed? In the eyes of God, there's two essentially declarations here between how he views the world. And he views world either as the child of God or as the child of the devil. And what he's saying here is that he will put a bit between your seed and her seed. Well, who is her seed? Being the woman. The woman is a future prophecy of Jesus Christ, and those who place faith in Jesus Christ are of the child of God. But those who reject the gospel of Christ, those who reject Jesus, those are essentially the children of the devil. So he says that he will put enmity between the woman and you, your seed and her seed. And what does it say here? He, being Jesus, shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. What is this a prophecy of? Well, I kind of explained to it what the prophecy of what's going to happen with Satan and Jesus and the future events after millennial reign. Jesus is going to be the one that tosses Satan until the lake of fire for all eternity. But it also says here that Satan will bruise his heel. Well, what exactly is that a reference to? That is a reference to Jesus' death on the cross, because knowing that Jesus was the Son of God, Satan tried to kill Jesus in order to avoid him from being the sacrifice for the sins of the world, so that those who have faith can essentially be reconciled with the Father through faith, through salvation. He was trying to cut off humanity's path to salvation by killing Jesus. But of course, due to Jesus' death, burial, and his resurrection, defeating death on the cross, he essentially only bruised his heel, which means that even though he technically turned against him by going into Judas Iscariot and turning against him, Jesus still won at the end, and he still got his salvation for his seed, which means that there's nothing that Satan can do that can take away a person's salvation once they have believed in Jesus Christ, meaning that at the end of the day, Satan has already lost, because he can't take away the souls that Jesus have already brought to him. So this is the very first prophecy that we see here in the Bible. And like I said, it's very, very important here, because this is not the first reference to Jesus that we see here, but this is essentially God saying at the very, very beginning, when there's only Adam, Eve, and the serpent, that Jesus will be the one that overtakes Satan, and Jesus will be the one who rules over him. So go ahead and just quick pause right here, because I know that's a lot to take in. So some of you guys may have questions. I think we'll start with Shagsworth there. I know you know some of the concepts of this story before. What is something that you want to bring up regarding that?
Well, I mean, like all these things, I still think that we'll have to go through more of these, because I still don't. I'm always on the fence about this. I don't know why. I'm the cynic of all this, because I'm like, well, someone can still write that. I mean, I think the beautiful thing of spirituality or religion to me has always been how you interpret things. And even like your literal interpretation of that as he's referring to, he as Jesus, like it could also be, again, it could just be allegory for, man in general, like the snake just representing some form of generalized evil, and men overcoming that. And while, it can, like, men are fallible and can be hurt, evil can just only be skin deep, essentially, and not just, not something that can totally tear us down. Does that make sense? Like, that's how, that's how I think of it, and not so much as like, this is, boom.
So you look at it from more of a perspective of, well, this could just be an allegory towards man rather than a future prophecy about essentially a Messiah, right?
Right. I mean, again, that's why I'm here, is to hear more of this and understand, like, at length how all these things can sort of link up. But yeah. I mean, I see your point in that. I could see your side of like, he is referencing some, Jesus in the future, not, so I understand your side. I'm telling you how I'm thinking of it, and how I've always interpreted a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and then that's why, like I said, this is only part one. So
right.
I've already got this laid out here. So I know you guys have some more questions online. Trust me, we got those questions lined up for you too. So just trying to get your early thoughts on that one. Spencer, what was your take on that?
Whoops, muted there. Yeah. You know me. You know how I boom it up. But so I have one take and then one question. And so my main take is sort of where Shags is coming from. So and this is just, it's going to be stepping back a little bit to what you said, just to give a full like lay of the land. But like when I look at the Bible and I look at prophecy, so you said at the beginning, right? Like how do you know that's from God? Like blah, blah, blah. And there's all those arguments over that. I think there is at the root of this, there is a religious, like let's all, I'll just use the terminology. Like I think at the base of this, there is a message from God who said, here, do this, follow this, all that. I get concerned sort of with Shags where I go, yes, I do believe there's a root here, but how many people, which is back in the day for nefarious reasons, went, oh, I'm going to throw this prophecy in here to maybe make it look like, oh, look, that, my cousin is the guy. That's the guy. So I'm not against it. It's like, it's just more of a, I want to see more of it. And I was just sort of laying out where I was coming from. And then my question, I just have one question, Jacob, because that was interesting what you said. If about like Adam was the one who technically sinned first because he was given that direct order. What would have happened? And if you don't know, nobody knows. What would God have done if he didn't eat it and only Eve ate it? Would only like women have sinned? Would it have passed by? What would have been the result of that?
Well, like I said, the sin would have been on Eve. She would have died, surely, because that was the command given from the. So essentially, Eve would have died. And for those who don't understand the context of kind of Adam and Eve, obviously, Adam was the first creation of man, and then Eve was made from the rib of Adam. That's why we call woman of man. So. Because, like I said, Adam was given the authority, because he was given the authority over creation, and he's the one who sinned. That's what led to essentially the great fall altogether. Eve wasn't given that authority, so Eve certainly would have died, but however, it wouldn't have caused sin nation throughout the entire world. It just would have caused her death, essentially.
Gotcha. That's so different. I've never heard that, so that's just really interesting to me. So that's all I got.
Yeah, and to your second point, and you're actually like right on, and we're going to get to this one here for our next point. No, a lot of people will say, well, then what if somebody claimed to be the Messiah? What if somebody tried to be who they claim to be? This is a very, very interesting point, and I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of this. You guys have ever heard of the Book of Enoch? Have you ever heard of that book or being referenced?
Yeah. Yep.
So the Book of Enoch is a perfect example, because the Book of Enoch is a book that is not in the Bible. Some people falsely claim that it should be in the Bible, because essentially the Book of Enoch talks about a time period which is referenced directly in Genesis 6. And in Genesis 6, we talk about a time period during the Nephilim, and what happened was that the fallen angels who fell from their posts, who were supposed to be watchers over mankind, decided that they were going to take up human women as wives and breed children with them. Right? And those children ended up becoming the Nephilim, which were half human, half angel hybrids that in a lot of cases were essentially giants. There were also other variations and mutations of them as well, because it didn't say that the angels not only went with human women, they also made with beasts as well. So they ended up recreating with, creating all kinds of monstrosities and abominations that God never intended, right? And the Book of Enoch talks about this time period where, these giants, which some of them were recorded to be 36 feet tall during this time period. Well, so they were massive entities. They started attacking and killing humanity, God's creation. And that whole revelation is essentially what led to the flood of Noah. So I'm pretty sure you guys heard of the Noah flood. God decided that he was going to build an ark, flood the entire world. Many people don't understand why he did that in the first place, because it was Satan's plan to corrupt the bloodline to prevent the birth of the future Messiah. That's what Satan was trying to do. He was trying to corrupt the bloodline through the Nephilim. So if the Nephilim had taken over the entire world and corrupted everyone's bloodline, there couldn't have possibly have been the birth of Jesus Christ, because no one's bloodline bloodline would have been pure. So that's why God decided to save Noah and his family, being, you know, his $3 and sorry, the $3 and their husbands and whatnot, and save them through the flood, and then basically killed everyone else that was on earth too. Now, we talked about this in a previous episode on the Bible Lens, where it's very interesting that even in nations, ancient civilizations that have no ties to Christianity whatsoever, like Greek, India, Roman, they all have their very own variation of the flood myth, but it all basically states that, yeah, one day God, whoever their creator was in their mythology, decided to flood the entire world, right? But the Bible's the only one that says that this is the reason why the world was flooded. But the book of Enoch, the thing why it's not in the Bible is because the book of Enoch, while it claims to be written by Enoch, it also claims that Enoch essentially was the Messiah, that the Son of Man was Enoch, which goes completely in the face of like all the other books that are in the Bible, right? And for that very reason, it's not there. And the reason why
wasn't it included for like a little bit though?
No, there's certain variations. Like, let's say that there's this is a big thing with Roman Catholics, just throwing them out here. No, obviously they add the Apocrypha to the Bible, right? So they have like these series of books that are not found in the other books. Those are Apocryphal books. Those are books that are essentially Jewish literature and Jewish history, but they're not biblically inspired canon. So these are not books that were written or inspired by either God's prophets or anyone who dealt with the Holy Spirit.
It's just more like the history of the Bible, like creation.
They put it to you this way
in there then, right? Because then it's like, here's Enoch. Everybody look at this book that was completely off its rocker.
But like I said, and with Enoch, it's not saying that all of Enoch is false, but you have to understand that with Enoch, there's actually more evidence to support that book was, in fact, inspired by the fallen angels who were rebelling against God by mating with human women to begin with, and actually was inspired by God. Because apparently, during Enoch, the fallen angels, the ones that rebelled against God in heaven, who wanted back in, they tried to use Enoch to be essentially their mediator between them and God rejected them. So in the eyes of the fallen angels, Enoch was essentially their I guess you can say son of man, quote unquote, their Jesus figure, because they thought that Enoch, because he was righteous, that they can use Enoch to get back into heaven, and then God denied him. And then it later says in the Bible that Enoch was raptured by God, and he died without he literally was raptured without death. So there's a lot of parallels there. Like, there's elements of truth to it, but obviously given the source of it, there's also deception to it as well. So you can't take everything that is written in those books. So the reason why there's a lot of books out there that people say, oh, the Book of Barbados that says this and all these other things. There's a lot of books that came out during this time period that were written by people claiming to be inspired by God and whatnot. But the reason why they're not in there, you can easily cross-reference their books to what is written from, obviously, God's chosen writers, being like Moses, obviously Elijah, Ezekiel, all the prophets, and see that there's clear inconsistencies there with his book, because God's word doesn't contradict one another. So if there's a book out there or a man out there claiming that he's the Messiah, but he contradicts what was written before him, it's very easy to see that this guy's not from God. So that's how essentially they figured out which were books that should have been in the Bible and books that should not have been in the Bible. Was cross-written what was already known as inspired writing. And anything that was written by Moses, they knew that it was Moses, because Moses was a real man who led people out of Egypt. They knew Moses, right? So whatever books that he inspired, any books that he endorsed, they would know that to be true. And then later the word would go pass on to the prophets after he made the law. So that's why you don't see certain books out there. And like I said, you're absolutely right. Anyone can come up there and claim to be the Messiah, but clearly the word's not going to contradict the word of God. And if it does, then clearly you have to throw it out.
Yeah. Cool. I didn't even think about that.
So, like I said, that when you read the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, which is why I know that there's this new movement out there that wants to kind of separate the Old Testament from the New Testament, because in their estimation, oh, we shouldn't pay any attention to the Old Testament anymore because we have Jesus and none of that matters anymore. It's like, that's not actually true. It's like there are still a multitude of Old Testament prophecies that have not been fulfilled yet. Now, the fulfillment in most of the prophecies was essentially us finding our Messiah in Jesus Christ and having salvation through faith in his sacrifice, death, burial, and resurrection. So by that logic, we're not following the old law of Moses that the Jews during that time period were following to be one with God, even though we find out in the New Testament that no one was found righteous by following the law, because no one actually perfectly followed the law. Like, If you, like I said, committed adultery, if you committed murder, if you stole, then you're basically guilty of like the whole law. So because there was no man outside of Christ that was ever perfectly fit to follow the law, no one was actually saved by the law. They were saved by their faith in God. The whole point of them following the law is because they had faith in God, and that's why they choose to follow it in the first place. But we get here to, and this is a very, very interesting one. This is Isaiah 53. So I want to read this one with kind of no context here. And I want to give you guys a timeline of when this book was written. The book of Isaiah is literally one of the major prophets in the Old Testament. This is a book that is said to be written between 740 and 680 BC. So understand that time frame when you're actually reading this, because this is where it starts getting very, very interesting. Let's pop this up here. And I'm going to read all of Isaiah 53. It's not too many verses, but just understand the words that are being said here. And the title of this chapter is called The Sin-Bearing Messiah. And it says, "Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and out of the root of the dry ground he has no form of comeliness, and when we see him, there was no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, as we hid as we are our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him." And it says here that surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon him. And by the stripes we were healed, and we like sheep have gone astray. It says, we have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord laid upon him the iniquity of us all. And he was oppressed and he was afflicted, that he opened not his mouth. He led as a lamb to the slaughter, as the sheep before the shears is silent. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. Who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken, and he was made grave. He made his grave with the wicked, but was rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor any deceit in his mouth. It said he was pleased. The Lord had bruised him. He has put him to grief. It says, when you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall lead the labor of his soul and be satisfied by his knowledge. My righteous servant, he shall justify many. He shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion of the great, and he shall divide the spoil of the strong. Because he poured out into his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many. He made intercession for the transgressors. So that's Isaiah 53. Now, without any context of anything that I just gave you there, who do you think that that's describing?
Like bang on Jesus, right?
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Now, it's very, very interesting because, like I said before, you have to keep this in context as well. The Old Testament prophecies were written for Jews. So this was a book that was originally meant for a Jewish audience, because obviously only the Jews would understand who the Lord was, who their promised Messiah was. So this was a prophecy about the Messiah that was going to come to save them from their sins. So the Old Testament Jews, Old Testament Israel, quite literally spent thousands of years waiting upon the arrival of their Messiah. You read this right here. Now, you have to look at it from a couple of contexts here. This is a book that was written, like I said, between 740 BC and 860 BC. So this was quite literally about 700 years before the birth of Jesus that this book was written, and that the Jews during this time knew about it, right? Now, it's very easy for us in a time period where thousands of years has passed since the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus, that we can read this and see, oh, clearly they're talking about Jesus, right? But in the context for the Jews, they didn't see it that way, right? And they didn't
like
see it.
This was the first like narrative of that, right? Like this was the first time any of them heard the Jesus story, if you will. I don't know how else to describe it.
So, like I said,
the actual story, not like fictional story, but like the actual story.
And this was 700 years after, before the actual birth of Jesus. So this is almost 700 years clean before Jesus actually went on that cross and died, right? So in the context of people reading this in the past, they were awaiting, okay, this is what the Messiah is going to do as a payment for our sins. But even to this day, the Jews, a lot of Jews, don't believe that this verse was about Jesus. Now, there is a channel out there, and I wish I can give him a shout out. I'll find him here in just a minute, but is a guy who literally travels to Israel and gives them this verse that's in the Bible, which is Isaiah 53. And they ask them, do you think that this is in essentially the Bible or this in the Torah? The Torah obviously being the Old Testament for the Jews, right? And a lot of the Jews in Israel just assume that this is from the Bible, because when they read this passage, they think, oh, clearly this is talking about Jesus, right? They don't even know that this verse is in their book. Or a lot of them haven't even gone back to read this book, and it's basically talking about to a T the life that Jesus led, how he was hated for the name of the Lord, how he essentially took all of our sorrows, he took all of our sins, and that he was essentially our sacrifice for our iniquities, right? And it talks about him being pierced. It talks about him being afflicted for our transgressions, how he was wounded. It's quite literally talking about in great detail the death of Jesus Christ on the cross by his own people. So keep in mind, it's saying here that not only is it a prophecy of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, it's a prophecy of how Jesus is still viewed in this world. Because here's something we talked about a couple weeks back. It was an episode that we did talking about how people kind of claim that faith in Jesus Christ is easy believism, because like, oh, you're just saying that we could just believe and be saved, right? And it's like, well, if you look at the world right now, I know here in the United States, it's very, very easy to be a Christian, and that's something that a lot of people don't like hearing, but it's true. You can be a Christian right now. You don't have to fear being killed. You don't have to fear, being ostracized from your community, ostracized for your kids' safety, stuff like that. It's very, very easy to be a Christian in here in the United States. If you go to, let's say, Pakistan or Afghanistan or India, it's a lot harder to be a Christian in those regions, because a lot of those regions have blasphemy laws. Let's use Saudi Arabia as an example, right? In Saudi Arabia, you can be killed for essentially blaspheming the Prophet Muhammad. We'll get to that here in a second. But part of blaspheming the Prophet Muhammad is calling him a liar. And calling him a liar says that Jesus Christ was in fact the Son of God. He did go on the cross. He did die. He was buried. And he did rise again in 3 days. The entire foundation of Islam completely denies that. So by simply believing the one thing that saves you, you can be killed in this world right now, which is why I find it very, very ironic that there's some Christians out there. I'm not going to throw their names out there, Emily and Mac, but there's a lot of Christians out there who vision this scenario where, oh, I can't wait for the tribulation because, I can't wait to be the person who gets martyred for the name of Jesus Christ. I'm like, you're not even willing to die for Jesus right now. Like, there are people who are actually being killed in the world right now for their simple profession of faith in Jesus. Yet in your mind, you think that somehow in the tribulation happens when things really, really get bad, that, oh, okay, you're going to be this Marvel superhero who goes against the Antichrist. I hate to break it to you, you're probably going to die in famine in like the first 2 weeks. And that's probably more likely what's going to happen to you.
That's the other thing that doesn't get me. It's like, if you are professing to be such a good Christian that like you are ready for the rapture and the tribulation to come, theoretically, then you would be, if you were that good of a Christian, if you were that good of or like that faithful of a believer, rather, not good, but you would be raptured. You would go. You wouldn't be left behind here. Being left behind here is technically only for the unbelievers, and then the two guys, the two like prophet dudes who are supposed to try and wake everybody up and then get like completely murdered by everybody. So I don't know what you're saying there. I'm not. I said, not a good enough Christian, so I can virtue signal in the end times. Like, I don't know what's going on here.
There's people out there who deny a rapture because, like I said, first of all, they deny the rapture because they fundamentally reject salvation through the faith alone, which they think that they're saved by their own works. Well, the Bible tells them over and over again, your works are like filthy rags in the eyes of God, right? And at that point, they completely miss over. But I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to hold on here because I want Shagsworth's response to this, because obviously what we read in Genesis was kind of like the prelude towards, the relationship between Satan and the world and Jesus Christ here. Now you're getting a very, very detailed description of Jesus's life here in Isaiah 53. Like I said, this is 750 years, honestly, before that event happened. So it's very, very difficult to say, well, let's say somebody wanted to essentially like fulfill their own prophecy and be like, I'm the Messiah, this is me, I'm the one that's being spoken of. Well, guess what? You don't fit any of the descriptions here of anything that was written, because you're talking about a man who's without sin, a man who was rejected and despised by the world, a man who took up the world's sin, the man took up the world's transgression, and the world who essentially offers salvation through him, being the Lord. And it's like, okay, you could claim that you're Jesus, and many people have. Even Jesus himself said in Matthew 24 that many will claim to be him but are false Christ. But it makes it very, very clear here, only one man could have possibly fit this description here. Sergio, I'm going to kind of get your thoughts here. What's your questions that you have here regarding Isaiah 53 and what it's saying here?
Yeah, I mean, this is way more poignant than the first one, way more specific in what it's saying. You know, I don't really have any questions. Like, it's this, like I said, this is more convincing in that, like, okay, now you're really getting into prophecy that people can like actually look at and be like, oh, there was something mentioned a long time ago, and now, you know, we're seeing a little bit more specific, and like, and then the actual life and death of Jesus Christ, like being sort of laid out here. You know, again, the cynic in me could say, well, there could be someone, you know, that could live their life this way and easily point to it. Now, it's not as nearly as convincing. Just have any person be like, oh no, like I am here to like give myself up for him, you know, like, especially nowadays, you wouldn't find anyone like this, you know, there wouldn't, you know, too many weak men, but no, this
but seriously though, think about it like this, just from that aspect, like how many people I think I've even asked you this question like a while back ago when we did our first interview. It's like, when we talk about the idea of God sending his son Jesus to the world to die for the sins of the world, to sacrifice and be the sacrifice for the world for their salvation, I asked you the question because obviously you have kids, and imagine being in a position where you would have to sacrifice your kid in order to save the world. Like, quite literally, in order to save the world, you have to sacrifice your kid. And you said at the time, it's like, I wouldn't do anything like that. And quite honestly, there's a lot of parents that feel the exact same way. It's like, why do I have to sacrifice my kid to save the entire world? I don't even like most of the world, right? So why would I do something like that? But at the same time, this goes to highlight, and what is really trying to show here is that the love that God had for the world, that he literally sent his only son to the world to be its Messiah. And there's a lot of people online, a lot of anti-Semitic people right now that are talking about, oh, well, the Jews killed Christ. Like, well, technically we all killed Christ, because the Jews killed him because they thought he was a blasphemer. The Roman government killed him because, no, they actually stuck him in there and killed him. And then at the end of the day, we killed Jesus because it was our sins that put him on the cross to begin with. So to sit there and be like, oh, they're the ones that killed him, it's like, you not understand that without that death, like, you're not saved? Did you understand like the gravity of like that sacrifice? But it's showing that Jesus literally went on that cross willingly to die for the world. It wasn't like that he was cornered and captured and killed against his will. He knew that he had to die for the sins of the world, for the world to be saved. When Peter said that you shouldn't die on the cross, he literally called Peter Satan. And that's 2 verses after he allegedly made Peter the Pope, which I'll talk about in another video that we'll do later on here. But just the magnitude here is that his sacrifice was the ultimate show of God's love and God's mercy towards the world. That instead of just killing the entire world because we're all wicked, evil people, he gave us a path to be saved. He gave us quite literally a free gift that we couldn't obtain ourselves.
Right. Well, I mean, the other argument could be that, you know, if this is written by man, right? Like, if it is not God's word and it's written by man as a testament to the inherent good that is possible by humans, you know, the lesson is like, we hear all the time, like, we're capable of great evil, but we're also capable of great good. And, you know, it's easy to lose track of all the good that can be done in the world, especially when all bad stuff is like televised to you on social media all the time. But I mean, again, you could look at this in a way that is, we are capable. Like, it's not beyond me as a human being, if it ever came down to it, that was like, I needed to send my son to die in order for the world to survive. Like, in some ways you could take that and be like, well, how many people did that when it came to war? Like, we would send our kids off to war to fight for everyone else, to save us, you know? Again, it might be a loose a loose translation of it, or corollary. But I mean, again, it's to show that sometimes people are willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice. And I know, again, I know it's a stretch, but it's something that
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I'll have one correction towards that.
Yeah,
You're looking at it.
Follow. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going from the perspective of, well, if it's just, somebody sacrificed themselves for the sins of the world, they would do it, right? But there's a reason why it had to be Christ to make that sacrifice. Like I said, if you or I just decide, okay, I'm going to die for the sins of the world, it's like, well, you're already a sinner yourself. So it's like your sacrifice would mean absolutely nothing. The reason why it had to be Christ, because Christ is the only man who ever came to this earth without sin. He came to this earth without sin. He perfectly followed God's law, which no man was able to do. And because he was viewed as perfect in the eyes of God, that's why his sacrifice meant so much more than everyone else's. Now, obviously, Jesus, the only reason why he was able to attain that and none of us was able to do is because, well, he's God and we're not. Like us as men, like we can't be that perfect sacrifice because we've all fallen short of God's law. We've all fallen short of God's standards in the eyes of God. So it's like there's no way that we can save ourselves. And that was kind of the whole point of the law, was to show you that, hey, look, if you want to be perfect in the eyes of God, you have to follow all 613 of these rules that God has laid for you, and the 10 commandments and all this other stuff. And not a single person has ever perfectly done it, like in their entire life. Like people have tried and people have failed miserably.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, right. Like I'll do it, and like literally 2 minutes later, it's like the fact that you said that you would do it is a lie, which means you've already failed.
Yeah.
So,
damn it.
But what was being presented here is that the law was basically to show man that, yeah, look, you can't save yourself. You can't meet God's standard. The only person who can meet God's standard is Jesus, which is why he took our sins for us so that we can have righteousness in the eyes of God through Jesus, not through ourselves. So that's kind of why what you were saying is that, well, if anyone could just sacrifice themselves for the sins of the world, why not do it? It had to be someone who was viewed as an offer, a worthy sacrifice, a worthy lamb, quite literally, in the eyes of God. And that only came from Jesus Christ.
Right. Yeah. No, I understand. I definitely follow that logic. Again, from the agnostic point of view, I guess what I mean is, if like we wouldn't necessarily believe that part, it would just, again, it would be, I guess the story would be the ultimate sacrifice, just being, even as sinners, whatever innocence we had left, sacrificing that so others could do better. It's always like as parents, Spencer, I don't know if you're a parent, but like as
so that's why I'm letting you take the floor, because I have no parenting experience.
So like as the goal when you're a parent is to always like pass on knowledge to allow your kids to do better than you did. And I always look at that when like I look at my mom's life and how her mother was raised, and I could know that my mom did better and is a better person. And then even myself, like I started off in a certain place and my parents divorced early, and I don't remember being in the 2-parent household for, but I have iterated on that even more and have they paid a price for me to, again, not as steep as what we're talking about here necessarily, but like, right. You know what I mean? Like the story is that, again, we are capable of really good things and making sacrifices. So we will never, we plant seeds for trees that will never enjoy the shade, right? Like in some small respect, that's essentially what
do we lose him? Still there?
Shags?
No, do we lose Shags?
Oh no! I thought it was me for a second, but I think we lost Shags.
Yeah, we'll circle back around here for a second. We'll give him a couple minutes to see if he scores back around. But basically what he was saying there is like, yeah, I understand what he's saying. Like in theory, like let's say you do have a kid and you want to set a better standard for your child than, let's say, the standard that you had to live by, right? So it's like, it's the whole idea here that, I want my, there you go. So you're okay. You're only gone for like a second there, but
Yeah,
basically
like
saying like kind of to summarize your point, it's like we all want to essentially offer our kids a better life or a better direction that we ourselves like live through, right? That's kind of the whole point of like being a parent. You want your kid to go through a better path and live a better life than you did, kind of setting a better standard for them that you didn't have the luxury of going through during your own upbringing, right? So that's kind of like that summarization.
Yeah, like again, and I know it's not. I know the price paid is not nearly as steep, right? And I think those who are like myself, who are in this sort of agnostic view, like this is how we take these stories. Oftentimes, as we're like, oh, like this story, it's so like it really was the ultimate sacrifice. If there was a sacrifice, it was this because his father wanted better for him and for the world. Humans, we are capable of doing the very same thing. We are flawed creatures, but we are good creatures, some capable of doing immense good, some just good, others can do great evil. Again, kind of going back to like even the story in Genesis, same thing. Again, I'm just saying how I look at these things, but I come here because I like to hear your input on it, Jacob, because it makes sense to me still. And I
get what you're saying too, from kind of just a rational standpoint, and it is true. Like we all, as humans, have the ability to do great evil and great good. The kind of where my sticking point is that without God, what's our standard of good? And we find out, especially like the whole point of kind of the law, where you hear about, don't commit murder, don't steal, don't sleep with your neighbor's wife, all of these things. It's like, how do we know what is essentially good from wrong? And all of our laws of morality, from ancient societies to modern societies, are all based off of God's law. So what we view as good and what we view as evil, that standard has been set by God. So without God, there is no standard of good and evil. Anyone can essentially say that, well, my objective standard of good is like, put it to you this way. There's a lot of people out there who, let's put it to you this way. Remember, you guys see the video on Twitter this weekend about the wacko girl from the abortion rally yelling in the face of some poor little girl that's strapped in the stroller. Have you guys seen that video this weekend?
I saw the clip on my feed. I had no idea that's what it was about. I just saw some lady yelling at a baby and went, well, that's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So you have to look at it from this perspective. That woman who was screaming at that child, in her mind, her cause for abortion is so great and so good that in her mind, anyone who opposes her is evil, even if the person opposing her is literally like a 6-year-old girl type to like a stroller, like a 4-year-old girl in a stroller, and she's screaming out of her face like a demon. In her mind, she thinks that little girl is essentially standing in her way is evil. Now, objectively, we can look at that and say, okay, I don't think that's the case. But in her mind, she can justify that because she's basically set her own marker to what is good and what is evil. And without someone to say that, no, actually, that's wrong, then, like I said, we're all led to believe that our actions can be good or are good, even though in reality, it's not good. That kind of makes sense?
Rationalization.
Totally. Yep.
All right. Now, this is where it's going to start getting interesting here, because this is where we're going to start blowing your mind with some of this stuff. Because, like I said, the question gets asked all the time from a lot of atheist people. It's like, prove to me that God is real. You can't prove to me that God is real. And it's like say, in their mind, they're expecting Jesus to come down from heaven, bring fire down from the heavens, be like, I'm God, worship me, and that's going to be the moment. They'll be like, okay, I guess this is the moment now. And it's like that comes in the future. And by the way, that's a deception of the false prophet. We'll get to that later on here, but I want to talk about this one because people say, what's the evidence of God's existence? We're seeing it right now in the Middle East, because I want to go over here to the book of Daniel. This is where it starts getting really good. All these people in the chat were talking about animals earlier. We're going to start talking into this, because what you're going to see here is that in the book of Daniel, and I want to highlight this as we go on here. The book of Daniel was written between 605 to 560 BC. That's the time period that this book was written here. And what you're seeing is that Nebuchadnezzar received a dream. He received a dream from God about 4 beasts that came out of the sea, and they were all prophecies of future empires, some that existed and some that will not exist till later on. Essentially, what God was showing him was his own downfall and the empires that would rise above afterwards. Now, not only was this a fulfillment of prophecy that would be fulfilled hundreds of years in the future. But all of these nations will actually come back around again as we go deeper into the book of Revelation. So what I tell people all the time is that Revelation is a confusing book for a lot of people to read. They think to yourself, oh, I hear things about the Antichrist and this harlot, and I don't know what any of this means. In order to understand Revelation, you have to go back and read Old Testament prophecy. You have to go back and read Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Zechariah, because if you try to understand Revelation in a vacuum, you're just not going to get it. And here's the perfect example of this. Let's jump to Daniel 7. Now, this is the dream or the vision of the four beasts. Now, this is not the first and only time you will see the vision of this four beasts, but it's very, very interesting once you start breaking down and interpreting what this actually means. So, in verse 7, we're going to read 7 through 14 here, because this is going to be important. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had dreams and visions while of his head while in bed. He wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, I saw a vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and the 4 great beasts came out of the sea. Now, I believe this is the Mediterranean Sea, which is in the Middle East. You guys can fact check me on that one, but I do believe that's the one that's being referenced here. And it says that each were different from another. So now he's going to describe each beast here. Now, on face value, you're like, okay, but what do these beasts mean? I don't know what I'll explain to you why it all makes sense here in a second. Verse 4, and then the first was like a lion and had an eagle's wings, and I watched until the wings were plucked off, and it was lifted from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Then I saw a second beast, a beast like a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said unto it, arise, devour much flesh. And after I looked, and there was another beast like a leopard, which had on his back 4 wings of a bird, and the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given unto it. And verse 7, and then I saw in the night visions, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, which had huge iron teeth, and it was devouring and breaking into pieces, trampling with the residue of its feet. It was different from all the beasts before it, very important there, and it had 10 horns, and it was considered the horns were another horn, a little horn, and among them before whom the 3 of the horns were plucked out from the roots. There were in this horn, their eyes were like the eyes of a man, and the mouth was speaking blasphemous things, which can also be interpreted as blasphemous things.
So, I need these drugs. Whatever this guy was taking, I need it.
Like I said, this was just in the water back then, Shags. You know that.
Yeah.
So I get it. You read all that, you're like, what the hell does any of this mean? I don't get it. It's going to make sense, and it's going to blow your mind here in a second. I want to finish this up here. Verse 9, I watched till the thrones were put in place, and the ancient days was seated. His garment was as white as snow, and his hair on his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, and its wheels was a burning fire. A fiery steam issued and came forth before him. Thousands of thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood above him. Stood before him, excuse me. And the court was seated, and the books were open. And I saw then the sound of the posthumous words which the horn was speaking, and until I saw the beast was slain, its body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. And for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Very, very important to list that here. And like I said, we'll get to this in a second. And then I was watching the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, and I told you who the Son of Man is earlier, so that should be familiar, coming on the clouds of heaven, came to the ancient days, and they brought him near before him, and then him was given the dominion and the glory and the kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages would serve him. His dominion was everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom was one which shall not be destroyed. Now, first of all, I want to keep this in context here. This was a book that was written in 600 to 530 BC. So at this time period, Jesus Christ had still not come onto the world. But what we saw here towards the end of that is that it's talking about the 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ, what we'll get to in a minute, because that's not the important part for right now. I want to scroll back here, because when I was talking about these beasts here, a lot of you guys are like, what the hell does any of this mean? I don't know what. You have lions that have eagle's wings. Like, what does any of this stand for? Later on in Daniel, it goes on to interpret what these beasts actually represented, and what these beasts actually were kingdoms and empires
Yeah,
that
that's what I was.
existed
Yeah.
that existed both during this time period and which will exist later on in the future. So the first empire here that was being spoken of, which is the lion, it says here, first I saw there was a lion that had eagle's wings and I watched till the wings were plucked off, and it was lifted from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. So who's the lion here in this aspect? The lion here is a reference to ancient Babylon, because the symbol of Babylon, if you guys go back to if you do your own research on ancient Babylon similarly, it had a lion with eagle's wings. That was actually the symbol of Babylon. So the empire that was being spoken of was the empire that Daniel was living through at that very moment. So what God was identifying is that this is the empire of essentially your oppressors right now, ancient Babylon, which God has very rarely any good things to say about Babylon at all. So you know that it's not a place that you want to be. When we start turning this up to modern times, this is where it starts going to get interesting here. So I just want to identify these first. So the lion here is Babylon. The second beast, which was like a bear, is actually Medo-Persia. Now, Persia turns out to be the nation or the empire that overtook Babylon in the future. So as this prophecy was being written, Babylon was in charge. After this prophecy was written, this is when the Persians took over Babylon, and the rule, essentially the Persian empire ruled over where Babylon once stood. It's very interesting when you find out where these nations actually are too. So you're getting a prophecy here of the nation that exists and the nation that overtook it, which was Babylon. And then you get the third beast here, and the third beast was like a leopard and had 4 wings on his 4 wings of a bird. Well, who's the leopard? The leopard happened to be the next empire that took over Persia. That empire was Greece, talking about Alexander the Great. And his empire and his rule took place almost 100 years plus when this prophecy was written. And the reason why he was given the description of a leopard was because of how fast he took over the empire that was Persia and completely defeated them. So God's gave a prophecy to Daniel just in that one dream of the next 3 empires that will overtake his region back to back to back over the course of like hundreds of years. Literally no one could have predicted those empires, especially during that time period, would have come not only to the point of who it was, but the exact nations that took over during that time period. And then it all comes down to a 4th beast. Now, it's very important here because you think, okay, well, the 4th beast has to be the one that came after it. Yes and no, because what does it say here? It says here that the 4th beast was different from all the other beasts that were before it and had 10 horns. Now, what is this a reference to? It's actually a reference to 2 things. It would reference the power that would come after Alexander the Great, and it'll be the power that would be in charge when Jesus Christ was on earth doing his earthly ministry. And we know that power to be Rome. So this is where Rome comes into play. And when he's talking about the little horn, the one that was speaking the blasphemous things, the one that rose out of the 10 horns, what is being talked about here? This is one of the first prophecies of the Antichrist. The Antichrist, which comes out of this revived Roman Empire in the future, and the 10 horns represents the 10 kingdoms. So we've heard this in biblical prophecy. There will be 10 nations that the Antichrist will primarily control, and with the control of those 10 nations, he would go on a worldwide caliphate, gaining power throughout the entire world. But it starts with specifically 10 nations, and the little horn being the Antichrist who speaks blasphemous things is because when we get to a point where the Antichrist has his power in the world, he will start blaspheming against the Most High, being God, and being against Jesus Christ himself, which is why we talk about at a certain point this entity is going to essentially place himself above God and declare to be God himself. So this is a future prophecy of things that happened that were fulfilled during the ancient time periods and things that have still yet to be fulfilled. Now, you want to are you guys following me there, right? I don't want to lose you too much there. Are you guys kind of following what I'm setting up here?
Still here. Yep.
Okay, so I want to jump over to Revelation 13 here for a second. I'm not doing that to go completely out of place, but I want to show you guys exactly how this is being fulfilled. And you're going to start noticing here, wait a minute, didn't we just say? Yes, we just did. So this is Revelation 13, and this is talking about the rise of both the Antichrist and the false prophet. So very important to probe this out here. Revelation 17, it will start 13, I should say here. And then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his 10 I should have said this before I started reading, but just in case you guys didn't catch on to this, Revelation is a book that was written between 90 and 96 AD. So this book was written about 600 years after Daniel was written. So this was not one that came in like right afterward during the same period. This is 600 years afterwards. Notice how John, who's the writer of Revelation, is describing the exact same beast that Daniel did. But this is very important. It says that he had 10 crowns, and on his head blasphemous name. Now I saw a beast that was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. So let's stop there. Leopard, bear, lion. Aren't those the exact same beast that we just talked about in Daniel? So John, who's a man who existed about 600 years after the time of David, is describing the exact same four beasts that he saw here, which is telling us that these are all a beast that will cry in the future. Now, very interesting. Let's talk about where these empires actually represent. If you look at the modern representation of these exact nations, these exact beasts, or empires, as you want to call them, when we talk about, let's say, the lion, which was Babylon, Babylon is now modern day Iraq. So if you see where Babylon is today, or where ancient Babylon is today, that would be the country of Iraq. Persia is the modern day equivalent of Iran. So obviously, when we talk about Greece here, which is obviously the leopard, now a lot of people think, okay, well, Greece clearly exists today, so it has to be Greece. Not exactly, because as you remember, Alexander the Great, the land that he conquered during that time period, some of it is in fact Greece, but a lot of it is also modern day Turkey. So what you're seeing here is that this beast, the one that overtakes all the other ones, are essentially ones that will overtake the nations of Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. Now, let me ask you guys this. What is the common denominator when it comes to the nations of modern day Iraq, modern day Iran, and modern day Turkey right now?
War in the Middle East. That's pretty much all I hear whenever I hear any of those countries.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But what's the big plot point here?
Oh, the whole Israel-Palestine war, right? Like with over the dome? Yeah.
Well, obviously, all three of these nations, the majority religion that dominates these nations today are all Islam, and every single one of these nations are currently and actively at war against the nation of Israel, and all of their leaders have currently wanted to wipe out Israel. So keep in mind, in the context of this story here in Revelation, it's talking about a future time where this beast that rises out of the sea, known as the Antichrist, is going to eventually lead a worldwide caliphate against the nation of Israel and against the Jews that are currently in Israel, right? So I want to bring up this point here, because this is literally what we argued about on Friday night on the other guy's show. A lot of people believe that these prophecies have already been fulfilled, and there's a reason for that. The reason why a lot of people think that is because the primary belief that holds on to this comes from the Roman Catholic Church. So Roman Catholicism has taught that all of these prophecies were fulfilled in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple. They say that the Antichrist was Nero, and that so basically all of these Old Testament prophecies and prophecies in Revelation, they've already been fulfilled. Don't worry about them. There's not a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. This is the belief that we know as all-millennialism, right? And over the last several years, that especially after the Protestant Reformation, people like, Lutherans, Calvinists, who we talked about here on this show as well, they've adopted kind of an alternative version of this called postmillennialism, which is, well, yeah, everything in Revelation is kind of spiritual, so there's not a literal 1,000 years. Everything's kind of like loosey-goosey. So these are the two primary eschatological views in the world right now, all-millennialism and post-millennialism, basically saying either there's no 1,000-year reign or that the 1,000-year reign was only symbolic, it's not supposed to take place, right? So this is what a lot of people adopt to, but here's the problem with that. These prophecies have not and could not have been fulfilled because those who believe that Nero was the Antichrist and that this happened in 70 AD, they cannot name who the false prophet is. And I said this many, many times before. If anyone tells you that any of this has already happened and they can't tell you who the false prophet is, that person is lying to you. And here's why. We're going to go down just a little bit to Revelation 13 and 11. This is talking about the beast that comes comes out of the earth. Now, the big misconception here is that the Antichrist is the one that forces the entire world to take the mark of the beast. That's what a lot of people believe. However, that's not true. We'll read this here in verse 11. I've read this a few times for you guys who have been listening for a while. Some of you guys should know this already, but obviously I'm speaking to guys who haven't heard this before. And I saw another beast come out of the earth who had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. So obviously, if you rewind just a little bit here, it talks about that the dragon gave his power, his throne, and his great authority to the Antichrist. So the dragon here is Satan. That's the dragon. But obviously, as we mentioned earlier, with reference to the lamb being the lamb of the slaughter, the lamb of the sacrifice, that's a reference to Jesus. So this verse is literally saying that the second beast that comes out of the earth will have two horns like a lamb but speak like a dragon, meaning that he will look like Jesus Christ. He would have the appearance of Jesus, but he will speak for Satan. This is very, very important because we're going to come back to this here in a second. And he exercises all authority on the first beast in his presence, which causes the earth and all who dwell on it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. And he performs great signs so that even fire comes down from the heaven onto the earth in the sight of men. Now, remember I just mentioned a minute ago how a lot of people, unbelievers, say that, well, I can't believe in God unless I see God himself and he brings fire from the heavens and he does all these great wonders. Well, here it's saying that, yeah, in the future, someone's going to do all that stuff. However, he's not going to come from God. He's going to come from the Satan. So very, very important to keep that in line here. But it goes on to say that he deceives who dwell on the earth with those signs that he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those in the earth to make an image of the beast who was wounded with the sword and lived. And he was granted power and gave breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast will both speak and cause those many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell who has the mark of the beast and the number of his name. It says, here's the wisdom. Let he who has the understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number of the man is 666. So understanding there that it is actually the false prophet, not the Antichrist, who causes the entire world to worship the Antichrist. And he's the one who institutes the mark of the beast and all of these other things. Now, if you're looking at this from a past perspective, you would have to tell someone, okay, if Nero was the Antichrist, who was the false prophet? Most people can only guess that the false prophet was probably some unnamed Jewish rabbi, and maybe it's not that important because it happened years ago. No, it actually is important, because if it wasn't important, it wouldn't go into great detail into who this entity actually was, right? So before I go into kind of the reveal to set this whole thing up here, I want to kind of get your thoughts on what we just read there. I'll start with Spencer. What is the things that stood out to you reading that one? What questions do you have?
Yeah, this whole bit is actually less of a
Go ahead.
No, it's this whole section is a little, I have less questions on this one, because yeah, when it comes to nation, that's what I've always sort of thought of when I thought of the beasts in Revelation. Like, it's got to be the nations. Like, that just makes sort of sense.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest takeaway I got from this section right now is obviously, like, you can make a prophecy, right? And you can make a vague prophecy, like the country will rise and it will take us down. And you go, okay, yeah, that could be anything. But what really got me is like the specific animals used, even like later on, or like really early on. And then like the leopard, that's such a specific thing that isn't in the Middle East per se. And then they use that one. And then that, you know, they say that the leopard will come, and then it's a nation that's represented by a leopard. So that was really interesting to me that I didn't know. But yeah, so far that's all I've got. I'm on board.
Mm-hmm. Shagsworth, what questions do you have there, or does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah. I mean, no one's gonna like me at the end of this show.
go right ahead. That's why you're here.
I mean, it's, to me, and remember, I'm coming at this the way I come at all this stuff. There's a large amount of skepticism, just because of how my brain works. I mean, a lot of the things that the similarities or corollaries you draw here, could be, especially between, what was it? My God, I can't even. Was it Zechariah that we read? and then Revelation.
Daniel we just read.
Sorry,
Revelation. Yeah.
Daniel. Yeah. So like a lot of those, I feel like, I mean, yes, they're separated by hundreds of years, but it's also, you know, I mean, you have the advantage of a story before, like, oh, we have part one, now let's write part two. Again, the skeptic in me says, well, of course it's the same beast because they've been looking at this for hundreds of years. So let's for the lack of a better phrase, give the people what they want. And so that's how I kind of look at it. You know, I don't know, man. It's not that I don't want to believe. It's just that this is how my brain works when I think of this stuff, because
there's too many holes in the plot.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like but I think that's the point.
It's interesting that you'd say that though too, because a little added context. Obviously, John is the one who wrote Revelation. If you guys remember the story, John was essentially exiled to Patmos. So this is very, very key here. This is why I said early on here that this book was written between 90 to 96 AD. And specifically why it was dated at that time, or basically universities believe that it's written behind that time, is that the guy who exiled John to Patmos was literally not in control until 81 AD. So for people who say that this is about 70 AD, you would have to believe by that logic that God wrote a prophecy about an event that happened almost 20 years ago. And that just doesn't make any sense if it already happened up to that point, which is why you would have to predate Revelation to 65 AD in order to make sense. However, like I said, John was in exile at that time period. And we know that because John, who wrote this book, they tried to kill him multiple times. They even, I think, dipped him in a pot of like boiling like oil or something like that, tried to kill him, and he would not die. And it got to a point where the people who were trying to kill him were afraid of him, because it was like, we're literally trying to kill this guy. He won't die. There's something wrong here. Well, let's just throw him on an island and get rid of him, because I don't like where this is going, right? It's kind of like if you were trying to kill someone and torture them to death, they wouldn't die. You would start thinking that, hey, there's something wrong here. What we find out is that the reason why John was kept alive, because he was the one who had to essentially accept the final prophecy here of God. But I know what you're saying. It's like, well, if they already knew about all these beasts, it's easy to replicate that. But here's the thing. The beasts that were in play during Daniel's time, the one that was described in Daniel and the one that's in John, those kingdoms still had not risen yet, and they still were not in play yet. They were still talking about a future prophecy, a prophecy that we now see fulfilled. Now, some of you guys who have been listening to this show for a while now, this is all going to be kind of like kind of a recourse to you, because we've talked about the mark of the beast, we've talked about the image of the beast, we've talked about, the 10 kingdoms, we talked about a lot of this stuff, so this shouldn't be new information for you. But for you guys here who probably haven't heard this is where it gets interesting. Everyone assumes that this is talking about a past event, so that way they don't have to look forward to something that's happening right now. Part of that has to do with the teaching of replacement theology, which says that the church is now Israel, that Christians are now the new Jews and all this stuff. So obviously it has to have a post-millennial aspect to that in order for that to be true, because if it's not, then that means that belief is false. But what no one understood here, and there's two camps that fall into this category here. You have I guess technically it's three. You have obviously the preterist side of things that says that all this was fulfilled in 70 AD, and then like don't have to worry about any of this. You have kind of the second camp of this, which is basically saying that, well, actually the Antichrist and the false prophet are the Pope and the papacy, and that's kind of where a lot of people, like both reformers and even dispensationalists, fall into, and that's kind of incorrect as well. And then the third one is that this is talking about a time period that we would not see for many, many years later. And what's happening is that the first two groups here, the preterists and the ones that kind of blame the Pope, were both wrong. At the time, they were trying to essentially understand and rationalize what they were reading in a time period of 90 AD to those several centuries like later, right? Not understanding that the fulfillment of that prophecy did not exist yet. However, it would eventually come into the world in a time period of 610 AD, because in 610 AD, we learned of the story of the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet Muhammad, this is basically how the story goes according to the Quran here, right? The Prophet Muhammad was in a cave which is located in modern day Saudi Arabia. He was going to there for worship, and all of a sudden an angel appeared to him that he believed to be the angel Gabriel. So the angel appeared to him and told him to recite. Yet Muhammad was illiterate, he couldn't read, so he didn't know what to recite. So this angel in return attacked him 3 separate times and forced him to the point where he had to recite what he called was the revelation of Allah. Now, Muhammad, to his own admission, was so freaked out by this angel, he wanted to kill himself multiple times until the angel reappeared to him and told him that, no, you're the last great prophet of Allah, right? So what was the great message that Allah had for Muhammad? What was the great revelation? The great revelation was that, keep in mind, this takes place almost 520 years. No, actually, this takes place almost 600 years after Jesus had already ascended back to heaven. The revelation was, well, actually, Jesus Christ isn't the Son of God. He didn't die on the cross. It was only appeared to make it seem like he died on the cross, and that Allah assumed him back to earth to return again one day. But those who are saying that he's the Son of God, that he died for your sins, those people are lying, right? That was quite literally the message of Muhammad, and this message in the Islamic world, due to obviously a lot of conquering, dominated the Middle East. So if you look at the Middle East today, a lot of these nations are all dominated by this message that still exists to this very day. Why is this important? A lot of people do not know or have not heard of Islamic eschatology. What does Islamic eschatology teach? Islamic eschatology teaches that in the end times, as I just mentioned in the Bible, we believe that there is an antichrist, a false prophet. These two work for Satan, and that they will wage war against Jesus Christ, which leads to the second coming of Christ in the end times. This is what the Bible teaches. The Quran and the hadiths that support the Quran teaches that there is an anointed one called the Mahdi or al-madhi, depending on what you go for. He will be the 12th Imam, right? And this will be a leader who will be anointed by Allah to essentially save the world and convert the world into an Islamic caliphate, meaning that during this time period, the entire world is going to be led to convert to Islam by the back of al-Mahdi. And during this time period, they also believe that Jesus will return. However, they call Jesus Isa in Arabic speak. But of course, Jesus will come back to correct the Christians and the Jews that they were wrong about crucifying him, saying that he was never crucified, he's not the Son of God, he is only a prophet of Allah. And that these two figures are going to lead the world into a time period of peace, especially with the nation of Israel, and that they're awaiting the arrival who they call al-Dajjal. And al-Dajjal, it quite literally stands for Deceiver Messiah. And Deceiver Messiah is a person who will be released during that time period, who will deceive the world against Islam. He will claim that he is the King of the Jews. He will claim to be the real, true, genuine Jesus Christ. But he is a deceiver, and that he has the power of devils, not the power of God. So you're understanding here that, wait a second, I just told you 2 stories that are the same story from 2 entirely different perspectives, right? So I want to play this video here, a little short clip of this video. This is from Kingdom Covenant, who did an entire 30-minute breakdown regarding this entire situation here. And he goes into, let me point this right here. I had the wrong screen up. And he'll Boomer. It's like I just pressed it, like I know I did. So said he's going to kind of explain in more detail the conflicting narratives behind these 2 stories. So this is
is this the guy we watched when I was on?
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a summation here. So here we go.
What this video is a glance into a theory that most people have not really considered, especially in the West. When we take a deep dive into the teachings and beliefs of both faiths, specifically on the end times, we find something that cannot be ignored. Many don't actually know that Islam has an antichrist of its own, which can be compared to the biblical figure in certain ways. His name? Dajjal, or Arabic for deceiver. He is a man that will come in the last days, performing false miracles, will claim to be the God of the Jews in Jerusalem, and will deceive the world away from the Islamic faith. Now that sounds somewhat similar to the Bible's version, right? But here is where it starts to get scary. Dajjal, in the midst of his rule, is said to be the direct enemy of 2 messianic figures that will come to oppose his dominion and establish the new Islamic world order. Now, why is this story so unsettling, you might ask? Well, according to the biblical version, the Antichrist does not operate alone, like Dajjal, but rather has an accomplice. You know him as the false prophet. And together, these 2 individuals wage war on a single man. A man who also claims to be the God of the Jews, performs miracles, and leads people out of the Islamic faith. Who is this figure? Can you guess? His name is Jesus Christ. When these two accounts are put side by side, they seem to be the exact same story, just from different perspectives. The roles are simply reversed. The heroes for one account are the enemies of the other. Islam's Dajjal is the Bible's Messiah, and Islam's Messiahs are the Bible's Antichrist. Now that is a lot to take.
So obviously I'm going to back it up just a little bit because I want to show kind of the graph here. So this is kind of the breakdown of biblical and Islamic eschatology here. Like I said, now understand the timeline. John's vision in Revelation came at 90 to 96 AD. And he warned of a false prophet and an antichrist who will wage war against Jesus Christ. And that was the biblical narrative that was given to us by the final prophet and by essentially the final prophet and Apostle John, right? So then almost 600 years later, the prophet Muhammad, who had no recollection of Jesus Christ at all, as he came 600 years after Christ, gets a revelation from an angel that he believes to be Gabriel, even though this angel attacked him 3 separate times to the point that he wanted to kill himself, told him that no, in the future, there will be an anointed Messiah called al-madhi or al-madhi. And then also the Islamic Jesus, who's not the son of God, who's only a prophet, and that they will go against the Dajjal. Now, very, very interesting here. We talk about the Antichrist, and was the Antichrist mentioned earlier? It was mentioned that he was going to be someone who comes out of the nation, a revived Roman Empire, and is supposed to do much like the animals we mentioned earlier, the leopard, the bear, and what was the other one? The lion as well, which we identified as Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. So we're talking about a figure that's going to come specifically in the Middle East, in that region, according to both Daniel, both in Zechariah as well, and here in Revelation. So it's telling you exactly what region the Antichrist actually comes from. And unfortunately, Nero does not meet that qualification talking about those nations here, especially talking about that the revived Roman Empire is an empire that would not exist until the future. So it couldn't have been the same timeline. It's also very, very interesting that the Bible describes this false prophet, which I say is a very important figure. Now, it's also very interesting that Islam claims that they have a Jesus who is only a prophet. And that in the Bible, when we read Revelation 13:11, it talks about someone who's going to look like the Lamb, aka Jesus, yet will speak for the dragon, aka Satan. So based on that, who you think might better match the description of the false prophet than the Islamic Jesus, who is only a prophet of Allah? And that they just so happen to go to war against a figure who they claim is a deceiver Messiah who will trick the world into thinking that he's the real Jesus Christ. What if it in fact is the real Jesus Christ? So this is where we start putting things together. So it's like, okay, let's pretend like this whole thing has not already happened, that this is something that's happening in the future. What if we are looking at the gun right now of a future war that will take place where the nations of the world will rally against Israel, will rally against the Jews in Jerusalem? That is the exact description that Islamic eschatology says about their anointed one, the Mahdi. And is that quite literally the biblical fulfillment of what God and everyone warned us about thousands upon thousands of years ago, talking about this exact moment? Now, for those of you guys who have been here a lot longer than some of the people who are listening here today, like I said, we've done episodes talking about the image of the beast in more detail, the mark of the beast in more detail, the false prophet. So if you guys want to check out these specific issues in more detail, we do have previous episodes that dig a lot deeper into this that I can dig into now. This is why I said at the very beginning of the show, there's no way I'm going to cram all this in just one episode. So I'm kind of giving you the cliff notes here, but it's very, very interesting. A lot of people say, well, what's the proof of God's existence, God being right? You're literally seeing the fulfillment of this happening right now. And I think it's very interesting that this weekend we had yet another conflict between Israel and Iran. Iran is one of many Islamic nations that are openly calling for the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the Jews. Turkey is another country, shocker. Iraq is another country, shocker. I find it very, very interesting that the last Iranian president who called for the death of Israel just so happened to die in a plane crash. Weird how that happened, right? It just so happens like a couple days after. Total coincidence. I'm pretty sure there's nothing for it here. But what we're seeing here, and like I said, it's convenient and funny that Muhammad discredited Christ, the Son of God, almost 600 years afterwards. But whether you like it or not, this is a message here that has dominated the world. 2 billion people in the world today are Muslim, so they all adopt this this ideology. So you're talking about a world stage of, man, how can a guy called the Antichrist, led by Satan, dominate the entire world and trick the entire world into following him and worshiping him? It's happening right now. A lot of people don't realize it's happening right now, but it's happening right now. Now, I had one last point that I wanted to bring up here, but I know we're kind of low on time, so I don't know if you guys can stay a little bit longer or if you guys just kind of get into the final thoughts of this one here. It's depending on you for here.
I can hang out for as long as you need. I don't know about Shags, but I can hang around.
I'm running low on time, but I have a little bit more. So
okay then.
Yeah.
So should I just go straight into Revelation 17 then, and then kind of get the final thoughts on there before I go?
We're there.
Okay, we're here. So let's try to get through this as quickly as possible here. So obviously there is a third player in this whole piece here, and this is why I mentioned the Roman Catholic Church earlier. The Roman Catholic Church is primarily the ones responsible for the beliefs that all of these prophecies have already been fulfilled, and there's a specific reason why they did it. As I mentioned earlier, when people were reading Revelation and they're reading the description of this entity that we're about to read here, the harlot of Babylon, they start thinking to themselves, this matches the description of a major religious entity that exists all over the world right now. Could it possibly be that this is the representation of something called Harlot of Babylon mystery religion? Let's talk here. I'm going to go through 17 as quickly as I possibly can to kind of hit some of the most important points. So keep in mind, we're all under the guise that this is an event that's going to happen in the future. So if we're talking about Islam being the fulfillment of future prophecy, this has to be as well. And then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls come and talk to me and says, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot that sits on many waters, who the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornications. So they carried me into the spirit of the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." Weird how it keep that term 7 heads and 10 horns just keeps coming up after thousands of years. But the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. Now, Spencer, you will probably be editing my review of Conclave here in the next few hours here, and if you ever do go back and watch that movie or go get screenshots for that movie, I want you to take note of how many references to scarlet and purple you notice in that film that is talking about the Roman Catholic Church. But outside of that,
yes.
And adorned with gold and precious stones, having in her hand the cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornications. And I saw a name written, her forehead, the name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And then verse 6, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled in great amazement. But it says here in verse 7, but the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of this woman, the beast that carries her, and she has 7 heads and 10 horns, which the beast you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition." This is quite literally the prophecy here of the Antichrist and the beast nations here. Continues, it says that those who dwell on the earth will marvel, those who are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. They see the beast that was and it was yet. So once again, this is future prophecy, not something that already happened. This is future prophecy. This is what John is being told here. It says that here was the mind of the wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains which the woman sits, and there are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. Very important there, because it's literally talking about further prophecy of things that we just mentioned here. The 7 kingdoms of the world, 5 of them have already fallen, 1 is, and 1 is not yet to come. Meaning the one that's not yet to come is the one of the Antichrist. The beast was himself also the 8th, and it's the 7th, and is going into perdition, meaning damn to hell. which is what the Antichrist is. The 10 horns which you saw are the 10 kings who have received the kingdom as of yet. They have also received authority for 1 hour as the kings with the beast. These are the mind that they will give in their power and authority to the beast. They will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. And for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. So this is essential. Oh, this is very, very important here too, because this actually leads into this. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw are where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, they will hate the harlot. They will make her desolate and naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman which you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So very, very interesting here. I'm gonna kind of wrap it up like this. When you go into the deeper discussion about who this woman is, it tells you right there, okay, well, this is a woman adorned in purple and scarlet. Like I said, purple and scarlet are the colors of the Roman Catholic Church, the bishops, the archbishops, and the cardinals, right? Those are the colors that they wear. You'll see it in Conclave when we review that movie here later on this week. It talks about drinking the blood from the golden cup of her abominations, right? We all know that the Catholic belief in the Eucharist is that you literally drink the blood of Jesus Christ. That's quite literally what they teach. So this woman is drinking the blood out of a golden chalice. And what do we see out of the Roman Catholic Church? Golden chalice where they drink blood. We also see the nation here that this woman sits on 7 hills versus 7 mountains. What is Rome notoriously known for? Their 7 hills. That's quite a direct reference to Rome as well.
I always forget that fact because you do that in like every show. You're always like, "What is Rome known for?" And I always forget the hills, and I'm like, "Baths, like togas, like what are we talking about?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, the hills, dog."
Yep. So it's saying here that, you know, the women which you see are people, multitude, nations, and tongues. Now, let me ask you this. We talked about the region of the world that Islam dominates. What is the region of the world that the Roman Catholic Church dominates? Obviously, a lot of Europe is under their control. As a matter of fact, if you look at the old Roman Empire, especially Western Rome, you see that the Roman Catholic Church dominates a lot of those countries to this day. We see them in South America. We see them in places in Africa. We see them here in the United States of America as well. They're not as profound as, let's say, Europe is, but we see them there too. The whole point is that God is giving you the description of a harlot and goes into great detail to who that person is. Why? Because the harlot is going to play a great role in the end times as well, because it says here that harlot will have a union with the beast, with the Antichrist. So the Antichrist and the harlot will team up during the tribulation time period, and during this period they're going to rule and dominate the saints of God. However, there will be a point where the Antichrist turns on the harlot and burns her with fire. Now, final point to that is it talks about the woman which you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Well, if we're talking about the Roman Catholic Church, then what would the great city be by that whole definition? A lot of people will probably say. So I believe, based on what that's saying there, that is a future prophecy of the Antichrist and its armies destroying the Vatican in the end times. Because what is the big proclamation that you always hear from Roman Catholics about the Roman Catholic Church? This is the church that Jesus Christ started 2,000 years ago, and the gates of hell should never prevail against it, right? That's their claim to fame. They use it all the time. Well, if one day the Roman Catholic Church is destroyed, what does that mean? That means their claim was a lie. That means that church was never of God. And that's why in Revelation 18, you get a warning from God saying, come out of her, my people, lest you partake in her sins and pay back double. You're saying that there's a warning from God to come out of her, my people, lest you take into her sins and take to her fate, which is obviously death by fire. So a lot of these starts to add up here, and I think it's very, very interesting that in the Roman Catholic Church there are beliefs, and as you see in the Vatican with the current Pope, there's a union being pressed here between Muslims and Catholics under the guise that they both venerate a version of Mary, right? Not the biblical Mary, but they both venerate Mary. And even in the Islamic hadiths, they claim that in the time of the Mahdi that there will be a union between them and who they call the Romans, which is obviously a term for Christians, but more specifically, who would the Romans be? So what I'm saying is that the Bible here is warning about this union between the harlot and the beast. We have essentially Rome saying that there should be a union between Catholicism and Islam. Then you said Islam prophesying a union between them and the Roman Catholic Church. Why is this a problem? Because Islam denies the very gospel that saves the entire world, his death, burial, and resurrection. And those who deny that are a spirit of the Antichrist, which means that whoever is professing this is not from God. And God will not have a union with someone who is against him, which means that, guess what? That harlot is also not of God too. And I go to a further note here just real quick, and I'll let you guys get your final thoughts here. I said this as well a while back ago, and it was kind of like a revelation. And the only way that this can possibly work, if we believe that the Antichrist and the false prophet represent Islam, and the harlot represents the Roman Catholic Church, the only way that union would ever happen is that Satan would have to have control of both at the same time during this time period. Because we know that he controls the Antichrist and the false prophet. But for him to have a union with the harlot of Babylon, he must also be in control of that as well. So as you start seeing here, when you really start digging into a lot of this stuff and you look at the world and look at the things that are happening, and there's so many people make the proclamation all the time, man, there's so many religions out there in the world, there's so many, how do I know like what the truth is? When you read the Bible, it really reveals the nature of the world to you, and you start seeing it in a completely different light, and you start realizing that, oh wait, all of these things that have been prophesied for thousands of years are coming true, and these entities, whether it's the religion of Islam or Catholicism and Mormonism and Hinduism, all of these things have a play that are given to you in the Bible. You can find the origins of all of these religions from Scripture. It's telling you how the world goes. The Bible is the only book in the entire world that tells you how this thing started, the middle of this story, and how everything is going to end. You can't find that from any other religion in the world outside the Bible. And because they were written far before any of these other religions like Islam came along, I think it's safe to say that they're the more reliable source of truth than any of these other ones. So real quick, I want to kind of get a summary for you guys. I know that's a lot. Like I said, I tried to squeeze you guys in before Shagworth had to get out of here. But Shags, I'm going to start here with you.
Start with
What's
Shag,
your thought?
I was going to say.
What's your thoughts on what you just read there? What questions do you have out of that?
Oh man, like the conversation is like never ending, and in a good way. Like there's a lot to digest, and I guess it always goes back to me personally. Just like when I look at all of these stories, they are just that, and they're just, I mean, they're beautifully told in their own way, and I extrapolate from them what I can. I don't know, like in hearing you talk about them is always great because you speak about them with such conviction and truth. And again, it's, as Spencer said earlier, it's not something like, it's hard to find someone who speaks about it like you do while not being condescending about it. Like, especially if like, me pushing back and saying like, well, I don't quite believe what's going on. I think
heretic,
right. There's a lot of conveniences in these stories that like I don't believe that nobody knew who Jesus was. Like I know that communication obviously then was much different than it is now. But someone claiming to be the Son of God and then the Romans taking him and crucifying him. I mean, stories like that travel and people learn and know who this is. And obviously the stories were told after the fact. So like I question everything. Again, it's how my brain works. It's not because I don't want to believe. I do, but there's also, when I talk about this stuff and I find myself gravitating towards, I want to be a believer, I'm scared because it feels like I'm losing control of my life. Like, oh, this stuff was prophesized. Oh, there's no controlling what happens. Like you know what I mean? It starts to eliminate almost like we are just tied to some fate, and that for humans, like we are insignificant enough on this planet, but then like being even more so, like it again, I have these existential crises every day. And I like talking about them. And again, you make it easy to talk about. We should for sure do a part 4 on expanding a little bit more on these, because it's a lot to think about. And I and I have other people in my circles who I talk about this stuff with, I am going to start reading on my own just because I think it's important to do if you're someone who's obviously on the fence about all this stuff. I think most people start where I am, and it's like, these are just stories, and then they evolve into something deeper and actual truth, or maybe not, or maybe they just remain stories.
And like I said, I'll put it to you like this, it's very easy for me, because like I said, I've been deep diving into this stuff now for almost 2 years. So I mean, I come from a lot different perspective. Like, I can't expect you to cram in everything that I know in the course of 2 years, in the course of like a week. You know what I mean? Like, no one is made like that. But here's the point here Clean Deplorables had, and this is obviously a point that you were talking about here. It's like, well, any man like could have written this. Well, what you see here is that from Genesis to Revelation, you're talking about a book of a series of books. Now, it's not just like one book. Like, where each book in the Bible is its own individual book that was written by its own individual prophet, individual, the apostle, whatever the case may be. You're talking about a book that spans between roughly 2,000 years that were written by 35 different people in the course of that 2,000 years, which means that if this is just like one big like rib, that means that there will have to be a whole lot of people into it in a time period of thousands upon thousands of years, the multitude of generations that would have to be in on it, and have everything fill apart to the point where even today we're still seeing, they say like, wow, Israel is still in play here today in the year 2024, and Iran's still in play, and it's Islam, all this other stuff. It's like we're seeing it play out. Like I said, the reason why I focus on these primarily is because these are prophecies. Like I said, it couldn't have just been predicted by a man. Like I said, you could look at it as being written from a man, but these are revelations that came to us quite literally from God, because the time period and, like I said, the amount of people or work would have to take to get into it, there's no way that they could possibly get to. But put it to you this way, we can't even put together a perfect collection of what was that book series, like Chicken Soup? Remember those old Chicken Soup book series? Yeah. We can't even put it together a perfect collection of that in the course of like 20 years. So what do you think that we can, that somehow from like 1400 BC all the way to like 90 AD to 2000 years later for everything to play out here? Like that's a lot of, to say it, faith into essentially this whole thing being fugazi. It's like at some point you have to be like, I think there may be divine intervention going on here with a lot of these stories. And to Deplorable's point, just real quick, he said that the apostles were basically hunted by Jews. They were, and obviously we talk about Paul, who wrote the majority of the New Testament. He was in fact a Jew who was going against Christians and crucifying Christians because he thought that, Christ was a false prophet, that he was leading people away from Judaism. And then he was the one who Christ chose to wrote the majority of the New Testament, as well as essentially give him the gospel of God's grace, which is salvation through the faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So even the stories of the people who wrote the book, like these weren't all people who were like, oh, I don't believe like this guy. Like Paul quite literally crucified people and killed people who believed in Jesus, and he ended up becoming one of the biggest Christians of them all. Just to show you like his progression and how the Lord like worked with him. And you see stories in that in so many kings, so many prophets over and over again. Like I said, it's hard. There it is. Chicken Soup for the Soul. That was the name I was trying to get in there. But yeah. But it just goes to show you just how. I know kind of your line of thinking. It's like, well, I mean, if all this has already been prophesized and like how insignificant like is my life, it's like in the grand scheme of things, it's not insignificant. In the fact that, yeah, you're not going to be able to change what God has already ordained, because if anyone can do that, you would prove God to be a liar, which is exactly why these things are going to happen the way that God said that they're going to happen. But what is the entire point of existence? What is the entire point of us doing all this? Is that God is essentially giving the world a time period to come to Jesus Christ. And he's giving everyone a time period saying that, hey, look, you can either do this the easy way, which is putting your faith in the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus now and not having to worry about what is to come, or you can miss the boat and experience tribulation time period where Antichrist, it says in the Bible too that he beheads people who put faith in Jesus Christ. What religion do you know in the world right now who is known for beheading infidels? Does that ring a bell? Is there any correlation that you can make there between people being beheaded?
I cannot think of one. I can't think of one.
I can't think of one, right? But this is the whole point of things. We'll end it with this. So I'll get to Spencer here for a second, but I'll end it with this note. This is the whole point of life right here, and this is the whole point of what we do. It is the gospel told by Paul, the same guy, like I said, who was killing Christians, who then became a big Christian himself. And he says right here, move over, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached to you, which you have also received, in which you stand, in which you are also saved. It says that if you hold fast to the word which I preached to you, lest you believed in vain, for I delivered to you the first of all, which I've also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scripture, that he was buried, that he rose again on the third day according to the scriptures. So the whole point of life is God is looking for his children. He wants to reconcile his children back to him. And the only way to do that is to accept the gift that he has already done for us, laid his life for our sins. And the only thing that he asks for in return is belief in his death, burial, and resurrection. And that's it. You don't have to go to mass. You don't have to constantly confess your sins. You don't have to be this great person and do great things. Like all these things that the world tells you that you have to do for salvation. And then you get frustrated because you can't do them and you think that religion is not worth it anymore. Jesus never said any of that. Paul never said any of that. He says that God wants to be reconciled back to you by simple faith in the Son of God, Jesus Christ, and his death, burial, and resurrection. And by believing and placing faith in Jesus, you will be reconciled. You will be given everlasting life, which means that you'll never have to worry about hell. You'll never have to worry about damnation. You'll never have to worry about all the bad things that are going to happen to this world. Because yeah, we all know that the world's getting worse now, and it'll probably get a lot worse before it gets better. But if you are with Christ, if you have Christ in your life, you will not have to worry about the things, because he has already promised these things to have happened. And like I said, if God's a liar, his word means nothing. But if God is truth, that means that his promise of everlasting life means everything. And that's what we come down to here. So Spencer, I want to get your final words on everything that we just talked about there.
Yeah, of course. Quick though, before we talk, do you need to leave, Shags? Like, do you want to step out early? I know you have like actual time limit.
Yeah, I do. And so thank you for letting me sort of exit.
Yeah, of course.
I can give you the floor just real quick, just before you head out of here. Cause yeah, we're glad having you here. Like I said, third time here, and I hope we have you back here in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for, again, having me. This discussion is great. Being someone who is the least believer probably on the panel, it's always great to have these conversations. But yeah, I do want to come back for a part 4. Hopefully we can expand a little bit more. But yeah, thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Spencer. It's great meeting you, and then chat. But anytime you guys want to come over to my channel, feel free to check out YouTube, check out Twitter. I'm also on Twitch playing video games. I do a lot of fun things. I talk to some really cool people. I'm actually going to be, if anyone knows Hypnotic, I'll be on Hypnocast tomorrow night, speaking with him on some comments that were made recently and comments that I made. Again, just having real conversations with people, not always agreeing with the crowd. It's hard to do, but it's something I've tried to undertake over the past couple of months. So yeah, thanks guys so much. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for having me here.
Until next time, amigo.
Anytime.
Later, y'all.
All right. So real quick, while you're here, I kind of want to get your thoughts on everything that you laid out here. Like I said, I know it's a lot to lay out in such a short time period, but like I said, like we can do a whole month series on here and still have a whole bunch of things to talk about.
So much to do forever. Yeah.
So what was some of the things that stuck out to you regarding what we talked about?
So obviously the thing that still sticks with me the strongest is the or here, let me rephrase that intro. So my big takeaway from all of this is I still give more credence to Old Testament prophecy than New Testament prophecy. And that is because, at least in terms of the New Testament, because by the time that book was being written, Christianity was established. It was making its enemies. It was already a force in the world. So I can very easily see a lot of what is in Revelations being written as like less prophecy and more hope. Like I hate obviously like that the Catholic Church is false. We want them to fall. So I'm going to say they're going to fall. So when it comes to like that, like the New Testament stuff, I'm a little more wary, but the Old Testament stuff is where I get really, really interested in what's going on here. Because like I said, there's too many like back then, if you're just saying like, oh yeah, there's going to be a thing with a jaguar or whatever, it's like, okay, what the hell even is a jaguar? We live in the freaking desert. I don't know what you're talking about. And then like,
just real quick too, you also have to keep in mind,
yeah,
like the lack of like technology that existed back during that time period too. It's like, put it to you this way, it's very easy to spread a lie with the age of like social media and like Instagram and like all that. You can very easily throw a lie out there and get the world to believe it now, but you have to look back at the time period of this was 2,000 years ago, or some cases 1,500 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. It's like a lot harder for that to progress with the lack of technology and ability that they have. I would actually
say it's easier for it to progress then, because all it takes is one corrupt mayor in one town to go, oh, we're printing this Bible with this thing in it, and then it takes off because nobody else knows what they're looking at. So when it comes to like,
trust me, I could do a whole episode on corrupt Bible verses. I even did an episode.
I want you to.
I did an episode like a while back ago. It was a while back ago on the NIV Bible, and basically asking whether it was actually a Catholic Bible, because a lot of modern Bibles, which is why there's so many people who are King James only, but that's a whole thing in and of itself. But the reason why is because a lot of modern Bibles, like the NIV and the ESV, they either remove or put asterisks on a whole bunch of like Bible verses, casting doubt into them, right? Now, here's the thing. This is the argument. The argument was that, oh, well, we found like a new manuscript, and it turns out that the King James added a whole bunch of stuff. Well, here's the problem with that argument. The King James Bible came to existence in about 1611. So that's when the first King James Bible was, which means that for about almost 400 years, all English-speaking Christians were using the King James Bible. When you look at these modern ones like the NIV, the ESV, you're talking about Bibles that haven't even been around like 30 years. Like the NIV, I think, is the oldest one. That only goes back to like the mid-70s. All these newer ones, like the New Living Translation, the ESV, the New American Standard, those are all Bibles that were created in like the last 20, 30 years. So you're casting doubt on the Bible version that English-speaking people were using for 400 years, but all of a sudden, oh no, we found this new manuscript and this one's correct. Well, here's also the problem with that too. They initially went and just removed all those verses from the Bible, and then a few years after the fact, they put them back in, but then added a little asterisk. So it's like, okay, well, hold on a second here. If those verses, in your estimation, had to be removed from the Bible, why'd you put them back in the first place? Why did you have to, like, if they're not reliable, just say that, hey, these don't need to be in here. Don't put an asterisk in it after the fact and be like, oh, certain manuscripts say this. Because now you're being like, okay, it seems like you're just removing stuff out of the Bible at that point, right? Either it deserves to be in there or it doesn't.
And that's where one of my big issues with the Bible in itself as an end-all be-all text comes in, is that in like, because yes, the King James Bible is the one that everybody's been using for 400 years, but that's just one translation. There are other translations. Nobody's using the exact Orthodox like Hebrew from back in the day. So my point to all that is that I am not, when people say this is specifically talking about this thing that's happening, I don't really put a lot of stock into that. So like, at least in the New Testament, so when you're saying like, yes, this seven-headed beast is the Catholic Church, I go, I don't know if it is, like, I don't know if that's an actual prophecy.
Well, you also have to look at it from the perspective too, just real quick, is that when John wrote that, first of all, a couple things to clear up here. John the Apostle was the one who wrote that book. So it's not like it's a guy who just came out of nowhere and says, oh, I have a new revelation. It's like he wrote obviously the epistles of John and the Gospel of John. So he has credibility when writing Revelation.
But my problem doesn't come with John. And that's what I was about to get to, is that when I look at biblical text and prophecy and sort of stuff like that, I don't take it hyper literally, because I feel like we are too far from when it was written by like John and everybody to have the exact perfect translations. But what I do look at is, what is the general ideas and themes and faith that is being communicated here, right? So like, that's why when I look at things like certain revelations, I can go, okay, I can see the biblical basis for, the Catholic Church will fall. I don't know if they're specifically saying it's going to happen like this, and that, but I can definitely see where at least this idea is coming from, right? And so like, that's why like I don't.
I don't put it like this because I said earlier I said earlier that I believe that this is saying that the Vatican will be destroyed by the Antichrist during the tribulation, right? Because that's
yeah.
Now you can say that, well, that's not technically what the verse is saying here. It's saying that the harlot is going to be destroyed by fire. So you're kind of alluding that it's the Vatican. Now I could just be alluding that it's the Vatican, but if I believe that it's the Roman Catholic Church, I think that by that logic, it makes the most sense that the Vatican is the thing that's being burned down. Because it says that once it's being, I didn't talk about this because it's in Revelation 18, but it says that when the harlot is destroyed, that in the entire world, all the kingdoms that committed fornication will mourn. And it thinks to itself, this is literally a symbol to the entire world that when they see that this destruction, everyone's going to be crying and mourning. It's like, what more of a view of that would that be than literally watching the Vatican, the church that for 2,000 years claim that the gates of hell, they're afraid against it, and it's literally on fire. Like, so that's kind of the way that I look. So I agree with what you're saying here. It's like, look at what the text is saying, not kind of more your own interpretation.
And
I can only go on.
Because like to me, it's and at least the way I see it is like, you guys, what you operate on, and this was what you asked at the beginning, is like, where's God? Why doesn't he show it? It's like, well, faith. That's the point, right? So when I look at you taking like the faithful interpretation of these texts, I can get more of the like, yes, there's the, here's the Messiah prediction. Here is the we are going to be protected prediction. When we start getting into like, it's going to happen this way, and I know, like you said, you're not doing that. I know you just explained your thing. I'm just saying for others, when you start going like, it is this, it is specifically this, I go, maybe not. I don't know about that. But then, yeah, I can see that obviously one of the tenets of Jesus coming back is going to be destroying false churches. And that would include Catholicism. So yeah, that all tracks right there. So it's like the substance I can get behind, even if I don't buy into like the way it'll play out. Does that make any sense? You know what I mean?
That makes sense. I get what you're saying. And real quick to clean the plurables, because he was saying here that the church isn't confined to one. Okay, we believe that. Like I completely agree with you. Like what you're saying, if the Vatican falls, doesn't mean that the church falls. What I'm saying is that the Roman Catholic Church is the one out there claiming that they are the church. Like, so in their interpretation, the church is them. So if their church were to fall, that means the entire religion falls. That's what's being represented there, not from the eyes of like a believer who doesn't believe that the Vatican is the true church to begin with. I'm talking about for what they preach and what they tell the world. That would prove that their version of events are wrong.
And that's why, like, I don't know if I would go, oh yeah, the entire Vatican is going to erupt in flames and all of that's going to happen. But I can look at like what's going on culturally, with all the scandals finally coming up, with all the tradcasts on Twitter sort of just showing their butts. I can see that the church is burning itself. Right. It is slowly being destroyed from the inside out. This could play into it. How? We'll see, because obviously there's like the Antichrist and all that stuff. But yeah, while it's going up in flames, maybe not in an explosion, but it's going up in flames. So you know what I mean? Like that's where I see it happening. And I'm like, there it is.
And then here's another interesting point. This is Islamic eschatology. It's not the Bible, but I do think it's very interesting too. This is where it gets nuts too, right? Because I think the whole crust of this is going to be this false Jesus. Because even in Matthew 24, Jesus literally talks about false Christ and false messiahs during specifically this time period, what we're talking about like in the Bible, right? So even Jesus himself is alluding to this event that's going to happen 2,000 years in the future, which quite literally is another example of him being God. Because who else can know what's going to happen 2,000 years in the future outside of God, right? But inside of that, in Islamic eschatology, their Jesus, which is not the biblical Jesus, they claim that their Jesus is going to break the cross and kill the pigs. Now, this is highly interpreted to mean that he's going to destroy Christianity and the pigs, the Jews. And
that's pretty obvious right there.
Yeah, right. So this is going to be the testing ground for the Roman Catholic Church, because there's a verse in the Bible, I think it's in Deuteronomy, I don't know the exact verse, but it's something saying that the reason why God gives us false prophets is to test us to see if we truly do love him the way that we claim to love him, right? So if somebody comes out there and says that, my God is Sheba and we should all start worshiping the God of Sheba, and you're supposed to be a real true Christian, you're going to be like, well, I'm not worshiping Sheba. Yeah, your mind. I'm not doing that. I don't
think so. Yeah.
But if you're a wishy-washy Christian, you'd be like, oh yeah, so worshiping Shiva sounds like good. That proves that you're clearly not the Christian that you claim to be, right? So that's kind of proof there.
Like, if we look at right now, look at like all the different, like the churches, like I don't even know the denominations, but like some Christian churches, some Catholic ones, there's this big kick on like, we interpret the Bible this way. It doesn't say this sin. You're not all going. And I'm like, look, that's how I would think about things as a secular person, but that's not what your Bible says. Like, that's not what it said. I'm sorry, guys. Like,
and look, I know we beat up on the Catholics a lot for good reason, but trust me, there's a lot. There's a lot of Protestant denomination. Like, here's the thing: when you realize, here's the thing: when you realize that there's actually no denominations in the Bible, like the gospel does not depend on you being in the right denomination. You realize, oh, this whole thing is a work. Like, so this whole thing is because people think that they're saved just because they're Methodists, or just because they're Baptists, or just because they're dispensational, just because they're Calvinists. It's like, none of that actually saves you. So it's like, if you're hedging your bet on I'm in this denomination, that means that I'm right, then guess what? You're not right. So that's like
linking back to what you've been talking about these last few weeks. We're seeing, I wouldn't call them false Christ fully, but we're seeing sort of that early stages of false Christing, I guess, because like you've been talking about, you talk about it all the time. Like, so many people are going, oh, I don't just need faith, right? Like, I have to also do good. And you like harp on this all the time. Harp sounds mean, but like you bring it up all the time. You're like, no, faith, you believe Jesus, that's it. That's all you need. But you see so many teaching like you got to be good, blah, blah. It's everybody's being led astray.
So and then you have to go. And then you have to go. Okay, then how good do you have to be? What level of good do you have to obtain before you're saved? Right? Like, how much of the law do you have to follow before you're no longer good? And then it just starts becoming subjective, and then you realize, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. That's what it comes down to. But I was gonna say the point regarding false teachers is that, so if this plays out the way that we believe it plays out, and it's going to be literally a false Jesus bringing fire down from heaven, deceiving everyone into believing that he's the real Jesus. But the one caveat is that he claims that he was not crucified on the cross, that he's not the Son of God, and he happens to go to the Roman Catholic Church. Will they acknowledge him as the real Jesus, knowing that he's claiming to the world that he was never crucified on the cross? Because if they do, that means that the Roman Catholic Church is not of God. That means that they are of Satan, and they're deceiving the entire world, just like the rest of you.
So you're saying Jesus will say, real Jesus will say he wasn't crucified, right?
No. This false Jesus. So we're talking about the false prophet.
Gotcha.
The false prophet, I believe, will be the false Islamic Jesus, because the false Islamic Jesus appears first. So this false Jesus is going to claim that he is the real Jesus, but he's also going to claim that he never died on the cross, right? So
at first I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure Jesus is going to say that. That's like his whole thing.
No. But the false Jesus, aka the false prophet, will deceive everyone into believing that he didn't die on the cross. And only those who stay true to, quite literally, as I've been hammering down over and over again, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, only those who stay faithful to the true Jesus will not be deceived by the false one, because the real one's going to come and throw the false one into the lake of fire. And then all of those who took the mark of the beast, what the false one does, they will also be thrown into the lake of fire as well. So that's kind of where I think is going to be the big dissension point, because like I said, there's Catholics out there that think that we can have a union between like Christians and Muslims, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, we can't. That doesn't mean that we should hate Muslims. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that fundamentally the religion of Islam is, by biblical definition, anti-Christ, and we cannot have union with a religion that is anti-Christ. That's just the way that it is.
I mean, to me at least, when I first came on this show, the reason I first came on is because I had watched that episode you were doing about the Islamic Jesus, and like we were talking, folks, right, about how I go, I don't know if that's going to be exactly it. It's a little weird. You can interpret things. The one that got me about that was like, it was done before Christianity was like all big, like with the communication and everything, and it like specifically hits everything, like detail you would have known about Jesus, to a T. It's really, really weird.
There's there's a verse in the Quran in one of the hadiths that believes that this Dajjal, keep in mind, according to Islam, that's the fake Jesus, that this Dajjal is going to present people visions of calming waters of heaven and the fiery fire of hell. And the hadiths in the Islam tells them that if you see the fire, that's actually water. He's deceiving you. So run and go and jump into the fire. And it's like, oh my God, they're literally tricking people into jumping to the fire fire of hell. That's literally what they're doing here. It's like, that is so evil. It could not have come from man. Like that, like I was saying, like
that, I was like, no way. And then you pulled it up, and I was like, holy cut. Like, holy
that's the thing. Like, it's the same thing. The whole point of this show, it's like, these are prophecies that are so detailed and so in depth. It could not have come from man. It had to have come from God. Whatever is written in the Quran is so wicked and so evil. It could not have come from man. It had to have come directly from Satan. Which, keep in mind, Satan, not in hell, not some big red guy who tortures you in hell. The Bible doesn't say that at all. It says that he's here on earth deceiving people.
He doesn't go to the fiery lakes until after the tribulation. That's the entire point.
Or after the millennial reign, because after the tribulation he's bound, and then after the millennial reign he tossed into the lake of fire.
Everybody goes into the lake.
Yeah, I've done many episodes exposing this, because this is kind of like my conviction point. Like, for me, it's like when I really start digging into this stuff, and it's just like, when you put everything together in parallel to the way the world is right now, like I said, you start seeing the world for really who it is and who's running things. It's like, you can't deny, like, how is it that all of these false religions in the world tell you about a version of Jesus? Like, put it this way, if Jesus was just some made up character that we created, like a fairy tale or whatnot, why are all these religions telling you that Jesus is a way or a way to get to like heaven? It's like, why that name? Why couldn't it be Muhammad? Why couldn't it be Joseph Smith? Why couldn't it be Brahma? Why couldn't it be like all of these other, why is it specifically Jesus? And you realize, like Jesus said, there will be false Christs and false messiahs. He's literally prophesizing that, they're going to present to you so many false versions of Jesus, yet the only real Jesus that you're going to know is in this book right here.
And then, like, to the point where everybody goes, oh no, we would be able to tell. It's like, look, what were Jacob and I just saying? Like, there's so many teachers out there who are teaching flocks to go the wrong way. It's like, I don't think you would, man. You gotta go back to that Bible, be looking at it.
And like I said, we're looking at this from like a much deeper level, and then, like I said, there's going to be that one person that what you said, Reddit atheist who never believed in anything, who is going to see a video on like Twitter of like this false Jesus bringing fire from the heavens and be like, that's it, I'm going to convert to Islam. Islam is the true religion now because I see it, and it's just like,
oh yeah, well, like that has always been, because when I was still like a like true believer, when I was still in the religion and everything when I was younger, I always remembered that they always taught me, and maybe you could correct me, this is how I remember it, that like, since the Antichrist is Jesus, he's going to be able to recreate basically everything Jesus has done. So he'll be able to trick you, and he'll also trick you in the way he'll be like, look, I did all that. I am Jesus now, follow me this way, or we're all going to unite. And I'm like, that the second somebody is like, I've united all the religions, or I know how to do it, that is like flag one. There you go. Like, that's you. Like, I don't trust you, period, because it's never going to happen.
And like I said, when you start, and then this is kind of the emphasis of how all these world religions are going to come together, how the whole world is going to be united. And like I said, you're seeing it right now with so many groups. The reason that everyone's going to come together in unison is going to be a hatred of the nation of Israel, which a lot of people try to claim that, oh, that nation of Israel, that's not God's people. They reject Jesus and all this other stuff. And it's like, these are people who have absolutely no concept of biblical prophecy at all. I'm not even talking about eschatology, just biblical prophecy, because literally over and over again, you see the theme here that the Antichrist rallies the entire world. Where? To Jerusalem. Where? To Israel. The whole focus is Israel. If you go into Daniel 9, it makes it very, very clear. The entire point of the tribulation is to reconcile the Jews back to God, to reconcile and restore the nation of Israel through great tribulation, which means that it's not going to be fun if you're to be a Jew in a tribulation. It's not. Like, you're going to be prosecuted. You think Hitler was bad? I know Hitler's kind of the gold standard for like wickedness against Jews. The Antichrist is going to make Hitler look like a small child. I'm telling you, it's not going to be pleasant. So
I mean, you're right, but that's so awesome.
Yeah, so this is where it all comes down to. But it says that, God will restore the nation of Israel, and the whole point of the second coming of Jesus is for him to save Israel from the armies of the Antichrist. And at that moment, when they see Jesus Christ in the flesh and they see him in his glory, they will know he was always their Messiah, that he was the Lord that was prophesied for thousands of years. So what's happening now is that God is focusing on the Gentiles and the church, which is obviously those who profess faith in Jesus Christ, when that time has been fulfilled, which is the rapture, the pre-tribulation rapture, then he sets his sight on obviously the nation of Israel. And then that's going to be his focus before his 1,000-year reign, which is why I say you want to believe the gospel now, because you don't want to be in that 7-year period. It's not going to be fun. A lot of bad things happen to a lot of people during that time frame. So,
yeah, that's why it's so weird to me that you were saying people are like, I can't wait, I'm going to be there. I'm like, you don't want to be there. That's the point.
Like I said, that because there are Christians out there who, as we mentioned earlier, you just said it a minute ago, they don't actually believe the gospel. They don't actually believe they're saved by faith. So they think that, oh no, I have to do this great thing that's going to impress God. So if I go out there and I die by the hands of the Antichrist because my faith is strong, I'm going to show God that my faith is stronger by everybody else been dying. And it's like I said before, you're probably going to die of famine 2 weeks into the tribulation. Like, you're never going to get that moment of, oh no, I died in the name of by the Antichrist. Then guess what happens then? Because you never actually accepted the true gospel and you died in the tribulation, guess where you're going? Not heaven. So
straight down.
Yep. And like I said, it says himself in Matthew 7, it's like, not all that says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about you. That's what he's talking about.
No, it's going to be somebody else. No, that's you. It's
yeah,
somebody.
Exactly. And then even the saying, it's like, did I not do great works in your name? Did I not prophesy? Did I not cast out demons? He will say, I do not know you. Off you go. It's like
that's the. I love when you hit it. You hit that point a lot in all your shows, and you always put on like your preacher voice is what I call it, because you're like, because you do the like, and they'll go to God and they'll say, but my good works, and he will say, I do, like, you, I don't know, I'm not doing it right, but I love every time you bring that up.
It says, depart from me, I never knew you, which means that I didn't know you for a short period of time, and then you started sinning too much that I didn't know you, or you left the Catholic Church, so I don't know you. He says, I never knew you, meaning that at no point during your entire existence did you ever have a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what he means. And a lot of people, they just go right over their head because it's like, oh, well, it says you have to do the will of the Father, which means you have to do good stuff. No, the will of the Father is believing in the Son. That's what John 6:40 says.
That's it. That's basically it, guys.
Like I said, I say it over and over again. I just feel like this book is beating you in the head. It's faith in Jesus, you idiot. It's like, after a while, just like, okay, I get it. But
that's where you're gonna get the big exposure, Jacob. And I even knew this back in the day when I was like reading my Bible all the time. A lot of Christians don't. A lot of Catholics don't. A lot of denominations just they would go to Sunday and they say, Pastor, hit me with that verse. And they talk about whatever that is. And maybe they have like a Bible verse app on their phone, but they don't ever really sit down and read and engage with it.
No. Like, even what's his name? There was a post made by like Louis C.K. Earlier today. It was basically talking about how I think the actual, I can pull it up here just real quick because I actually made it up.
I was gonna say like, holy, I didn't even think he was still alive. I don't know what he's been up to.
So this is the verse that he talked about here, and this is kind of the big problem with people who think that they're close to God or that they're Christian just because they go to church. Here's the problem here. He says, I went to church today, and the first time in a while, I liked what I heard. It had nothing to do with politics. They said we should all love each other even if we have different views. We shouldn't judge, lead by example, not by criticism. They encouraged people to take home Bibles for free and didn't ask for money. And I was like, okay, all that is great. However, you left and you're still just as unsaved as you were before. Because this is what I replied to. Where's my reply here? Because I want to bring up what I said. Here's my reply to him. It says, did you learn the gospel? Did you learn about Jesus? Did you learn that salvation is by faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? And gave him 1 Corinthians here. It says, if not, you went to a church that tickled your ears but did nothing for your soul. That was essentially my reply to him. So it's like, and a lot of people who profess to be Christians think that, oh, if I just go to church every Sunday, or if I just show up occasionally and be a good person and don't judge people, then I'm in good standing with God. It's like, no, that's not what the Bible says. And the Bible says you'll be one of the people who Jesus says, depart from me, I never knew you. And that's where it's right there. So I think we'll go ahead and end it there. I'm really glad that we did this. Like I said, there's so much more detail, but it's like, dude, like I can do an entire like episode alone, just like the individual verses that we went through today. But here's what we're gonna do. In about 30 minutes, once I'm done with this show with Spencer, I'm going to send off my bounding review for the movie Conclave, which I'm pretty sure is going to upset a whole lot of people, which is exactly why I'm submitting it. By the way, it's 1,500 words, so good luck with that one. Oh, boy. So good luck. But next week on the show, next Sunday, I'm going to do a full-fledged breakdown of the movie Conclave that just released this week, which is about the Roman Catholic Church finding a new pope. Because, believe it or not, even this review that I'm going to drop over at Bounding, there's a lot of aspects to this movie that I didn't even go in great detail for, because technically it's a movie review. So technically it's a movie review, so I can't go too hard in the paint. But for next week,
that's why we have this show.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do next week here on this show. I'm going hard in the paint. A biblical review of the movie Conclave is what episode 68 will be about. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to you, Spencer, for joining us here, going a little bit into overtime as well. But
no, my pleasure, man.
Or where can we find more of you?
You can find me over on my own channel, Studio Kabuto. I host a live stream on Fridays over there. And then mainly you can catch me and Jacob over on boundingintocomics.com, where we put up news every day, and Jacob's Conclave review is about to go out. And on Wednesday, we will all be together to probably talk about how awful Venom was.
Oh, yeah. No, Tuesday, we're absolutely talking about how awful Venom was.
Right.
Wednesday and Tuesday, I guess. So, yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this coming Tuesday, we will be having the bar room. We'll be talking about Venom and a few other stories. Then Wednesday, we'll talk about it as well. Quick little note, I will remind you on the bar room this week. Next week's show will not be on election night, because I'm actually going to Nashville on election night for another event. So next week's bar room will be on Monday instead of Tuesday. So like I said, I'll remind you guys
back to the old schedule.
So for 1 week only, we'll be moving the bar week to Monday. That's next Monday, not tomorrow, but the week afterwards will be on Monday. So that's a cool reminder there. So yeah, bar room's Tuesday. The 01 show's on Wednesday. Me and Nerdikins recorded an episode about Pokemon manga on Friday, about blue, green, and red. This coming Friday, we'll be back same time, 7 p.m. on Friday. We're going to be talking about the yellow arc of the Pokemon manga, so that we're going to continue our discussion there. And like I said, next Sunday, we'll be back here, or I'll be back here. We'll be talking about the movie Conclave and going into a lot more detail. Like I said, knowing what I know, especially about Mystery Babylon and watching the cinematography, like Spencer, I'm telling you right now, if you watch this movie, you're going to get completely creeped out about how much scarlet and purple is in this film. Like, it's going to start getting really, really uncomfortable after a while.
Now I need to watch this movie. Like, I will do your review, and then I'm going to go find it, and I'm going to watch it, because now I need to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's all that we got coming up here. I want to go ahead and thank everyone who joined us here tonight. Obviously, Shags, who was here with us earlier as well. Hopefully, we'll have him back as well. Vanya, Leslie Tarkin, Awesome One, Brandon, King Deplorables. Who else do we have here? RJ, who joined us for a little bit as well. Everyone who joined us for tonight's show, thank you very much for joining us on another Sunday night. Hopefully I will see you on Tuesday, if not Wednesday, if not Friday, or if not, I'll see you guys back here next week for another episode. Goodbye, good night, and now I get to hit the outro. Adios.
Once I turned to Jesus and I realized how he had changed my outlook on life, not just softball, but understanding how much I have to live for, and that's living to exemplify the kingdom. And I think that brings so much freedom.
David, I know share a strong faith. How does that help you on a night like tonight?
It's everything. Christ's resurrection is everything. Not just his life, but his death and resurrection. You can only get that through him, the Holy Spirit only through him. No false prophets, no Muhammad, no anyone else. Only Jesus Christ himself.
Let me tell you one more thing. This might be the most important thing you'll ever hear. There is true freedom, a freedom that no one can take from you in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Don't ever forget that. If you remember one thing I say, remember that.
I've got lots to tell you. Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved.
Is that your reaction to what people who want you off the spotty shortly?
Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved.
And what about you being stripped of your belt? I mean, that's you must be very unhappy with that. What's your reaction to that?
Jesus loves me. He loves you too, and he loves loves you too. He loves these people in here. And he loves everybody in the world. All you've got to do is repent of your sins and you will be forgiven.